My name is Heather Moline. I'm an energy policy advisor at the UTC, and we have some guidelines for participation first. First, please do make sure you mute yourself and turn off your camera when you're not speaking. Second, I believe there's no Q&A function in Zoom. So for questions and technical issues, we'd like you to use the chat, and we will be available to help you through chat. There's a closed captioning option available on the control bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you'd like to raise your hand, the raise hand function is within the reactions bar with the little smiley face. So when we get to Q&A, that's how you raise your hand. If you're on the phone today, dial *9 to raise and lower your hand, dial *6 to mute and unmute, and we ask that you remain muted unless speaking. When called on, we'd like you to provide your first and last name and who you are representing if you're representing someone. Housekeeping, there is a specific to this meeting sign-in sheet right outside the door. So as folks come in or on break, if you could sign that sheet, that would be great. If you're joining via Zoom, we ask that you rename yourself with your first and last name and affiliation, such as organization or a member of a certain utility, et cetera. And I think you do that by right-clicking your name. So right-click your name and rename yourself with your first and last name and affiliation. That would be great. Restrooms, if you're here in person, out the door to the left. We will have question and answer sessions after each group of speakers, but general public comment will leave until after the last group of speakers. We ask that you avoid interrupting other speakers. Asking questions, in general, we'd love for you to save your spoken aloud questions for the Q&A portions. I think there are 3 Q&A portions that we have today, but we definitely welcome clarifying questions, especially from the bench here, our hosts, our legislators, if we have any here during the presentations, clarifying questions. We also, my friends, Austin and Peyton, will be monitoring Zoom throughout the Zoom chat. So if you have questions or need support, please do submit your questions via Zoom, and we can organize how to respond to them in the best way. And then the last thing, if you'll notice, I'm leaning forward into my mic here. We would appreciate that you get as close as possible to a microphone when you're speaking. Thank you. Here's a summary of our agenda today. So we'll start with some opening comments. We have a resource adequacy tutorial, 101. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation and the Western Electricity Coordinating Council will present on their resource adequacy studies. Then we'll have our first question and answer period. Then we'll have a break. Then E3 will present on phase 1 of their resource adequacy study for Northwest Utilities. Then we'll have another Q&A, and we'd like to prioritize questions during that time from non-utility entities. Then we'll have an update on the Governor's Data Center Working Group. Then we'll have a break. Then Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance and Tacoma Public Utility District will be presenting on demand-side resource opportunities and load flexibility specifically. Then we'll have another Q&A. And then will be public comment, general public comment, an opportunity for that. Closing remarks from our hosts, and we will be finished by 5 p.m. So a little intro here, just in case you're new. Revised Code of Washington, so that statute RCW 19-280-065 requires that the UTC and Commerce host at least 1 resource adequacy meeting per year. This is the second resource adequacy meeting we hosted this year, and today we're focusing on non-seasonal, traditionally longer-term resource adequacy in line with meetings that we've held in previous years. We had another meeting on June 5th that focused on summer readiness, and our last meeting of this year will be November 4th in the morning. We will say more about that, and that will focus on largely on winter readiness. All of this information and more is available at the UTC's Resource Adequacy webpage, which if you don't have that link yet, you can actually just do a Google search for UTC Resource Adequacy and the page will pop up. And now I will turn it over to our chair for opening comments.
Thanks, Heather. And let me start by thanking everybody here and thanking you, the staff, for putting together this great workshop, as well as the Commerce staff who've helped us put this together. As Heather just pointed out, our discussion here today is a statutory requirement, but besides that, it's a really critical discussion. Indeed, I don't think the legislature put the requirement in for nothing, and we're lucky to have a former legislator with us here, and Director Nguyen. Thanks for joining us here, and I know you've been part of these discussions in the past, and it looks like we have some legislative staff on the line as well. But this is the keeping the lights on part of our work, and it's critical to have this space for us to understand the issues, for us to collectively learn and to collaborate on solutions on resource adequacy. If we don't get this right, it can lead to increased times when customers are out of power. And for some, that's an inconvenience. But for many, it's not. It is the life and death work that we do. It can be a matter of life and death on the coldest days or the hottest days. As an aside, you'll hear a little bit about this later. Glenn Blackman and I have been participating in a working group on data centers, which we'll give you an update on that here, but not necessarily about resource adequacy, but a term that we're talking about a lot there is cost allocation for new data centers coming on. And we talk about the fair share that data centers should pay. And keep getting focused on the fact that those words really matter. How we define and how we look at fair share really is the defining feature of that. And I think that's true here in a very different way, but we talk about resource adequacy. And I guess a lot of it is in how we define what is adequate and what is not adequate. So looking forward to a great lineup today. Heather, again, thank you for that great agenda. And we'll see here as we learn together the dynamic situation we're working in and looking forward to the discussion today. So I'll hand it over to Director Nguyen for some welcoming comments from the Department of Commerce.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's been a little bit since I've had to use these microphones. I don't have to chair a committee anymore. Well, first off, thank you. And I wanted to welcome Representative Dolio as well over in the House. She is the chair of the Environment Energy Committee and making sure that we recognize that important work. I think for this is such a critical component for us in Washington State. We've traveled across Washington at the Department of Commerce, and I'll say two of the things that come up the most oftentimes is affordability around housing. And the second one is energy, whether it is resilience, adequacy, but also around ensuring that we have enough load for our communities as well. So this is certainly a very important topic for us. Very thankful to be here as the Director of Commerce in Washington State under Governor Ferguson's administration. I've attended these in the past as my previous role in the legislature as well as chair of the Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. And then I also see former staff Kim on my team that's there as well, and Daniel from the House, the Republican caucus over there as well. But you know, as we talk through what these look like, this is a very important issue for us to consider. This is also times issues that not the general public don't always understand how important it is, but also how close we are sometimes to having events that would be very problematic as well. And in fact, in preparations for this meeting, I actually met with former BPA Administrator Steve Wright last week for coffee to chat through around his thoughts in terms of how the state can better work with BPA and also how we can really position ourselves for success on a number of efforts. And candidly, you know, folks, again, don't know is back in the 2000s and other times, we've been pretty close to having an event that might be construed as very problematic. And learning from the lessons of the past is going to be important for us as we move forward. So thank you, Chair Reberick, for the partnership. Thank you to the staff here at Commerce, Austin and Glenn, for your work on this as well. Commerce, for those who don't know, has really 5 key pillars in which we engage. Housing is one, energy is another. We also do economic development. We also do local government, and we also do community services as well. And they're all very much interrelated. So we need to make sure that we have enough energy to supply all the other efforts that we have. So I'll hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
And let's hand it to Commissioner Randall. No? Oh, yes.
Okay, and I understand from Joe Nguyen that Alex Rammel is online. Pleased to have you here. I'm Ann Rundall, Commissioner for the Utilities and Transportation Commission, and resource adequacy is just the linchpin of everything that we do on the energy work, making sure that we have sufficient capacity and plan for that into the future so that we can support people's lives, economic development, and how we move forward in the state. So understanding that we've had a conversation about summer readiness, we'll have a conversation about winter readiness. But right now we're talking about not are the lights going to be on tomorrow, but how are we planning to make sure that the lights are going to be on and the heat's going to be on and we can turn the water pumps on as we go forward. So happy to engage in this and looking forward to hearing the conversations we have from speakers today. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you to our staff and to Commerce staff for putting this together. Director Nguyen, great to see you here. Chair Dolio, nice to see you as well. Thank you. It sort of shows the importance of this event. Not that we know that we all know that it is important, but it's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you. You know, I share my thanks with Commissioner Rendall as well, because this, by statute, this resource adequacy meeting we're to do at least one per year. And thanks to Commissioner Rendall, now we've moved that to 3, right? Because it reflects the variables, the complexities, and the importance really of resource adequacy. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you to all who are participating today and for providing your written materials and the presentations that we'll have later. Really appreciate you all being here. Thank you so very much.
And with that, very excited to have an opportunity now to really deconstruct what resource adequacy means, because we're always in rooms where we say this thing. Some of us probably don't even know what it means because we're total beginners. We have a great speaker today to help us understand that. And I will hand the mic and the screen sharing to Debbie Liu.
Thank you so much, Heather, and thank you so much, commissioners, for inviting me to speak today. And I'm going to try and share my screen here. This works. Let's see. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I've been asked to do a basics 101 on resource adequacy. So if you work in resource adequacy, you can go get a coffee right now, come back in 20 minutes. My name is Debbie Liu. I'm the executive director of ESIG, the Energy Systems Integration Group. For those of you who don't know us, we're an educational nonprofit. We convene industry to address technical issues such as how to evolve resource adequacy methods for modern power systems. I encourage you, if you've never heard of us before, go to our website, our YouTube channel, because all of our workshops, webinars, reports, it's all recorded, it's all available freely. So first of all, why is it that we need resource adequacy, right? We don't do resource adequacy for coffee beans or computer chips. What makes electricity different? So first of all, a big difference is that the utility has an obligation to serve, right? NVIDIA can tell you they don't have enough chips to sell you. The utility can't do that. Second, electricity has to be consumed when it's generated. It can't just go into the ether. Now, it's true, we can store electricity in batteries, but that's not super cheap, like storing coffee beans in a warehouse. Third, traditionally, electricity demand is not very price sensitive. Consumers generally want a certain amount of electricity that doesn't change much based on price. And then fourth, related to this, the pricing is regulated. The volatility of the prices is capped, and price signals to the end users are not very strong. And then lastly, the reliability is the same for all customers in that location, right? So we have fast and slow internet today, but we don't really have high reliability and low reliability electricity. So those are some very fundamental reasons why we do resource adequacy. So resource adequacy is the ability of the system to supply firm demand at all times. So it comes, of course, from generators, but it could also come from other resources like storage, like demand flexibility, like transmission to neighboring regions. And resource adequacy is all about probabilities and risk. So it used to be about what's the probability that a few big generators all go out at the same time? Today, it's much more complicated. We have wind, we have solar, which are variable. We have demand response, we have batteries, which are duration limited resources, right? So this is much more complicated today. Now, a typical criteria that we use often in the US is 1 day loss of load in 10 years. Now, there's some nuances. We account for scheduled and credible unscheduled outages of system components. So if there's a forced outage or some emergency at a generator and it needs to trip offline, we account for that. We assume the system is going to be operated optimally. And very importantly, the outages that happen at your house, over 90%.
Everybody.
Sorry. Sorry, Debbie.
Debbie,
We're-
sorry, for some reason we lost you for a sec. Give us a minute.
Oh, wait. Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Great.
And
Okay.
But if
Sorry about
you're
that.
online, if you could mute your line because we're getting some noise, that would be helpful.
So most outages happen at the distribution system level, and most of the outages that you experience at your home are at the distribution system level. What resource adequacy studies is not the distribution level outages at your house, it's the bulk power system outages at the transmission level. It's the network outages. Now, it's important to note there's a trade-off. So no system is 100%
Did you
reliable.
get the link? No, I don't have it. It's on your phone. I got the later and send me something, but
And the closer you get to 100% reliability, the more you need to spend to get to higher levels of reliability. So there's diminishing returns, and we want electricity to be affordable. So we need to find a good balance here. Oops. So these are two recent loss of load events. Loss of load that's roughly on the order of a day and 10-year events, but they're very different. So here on the left, this is California in 2020, and you can see they shed about 1,000 megawatts of load, so about 2 to 3% of their total load for about an hour on this day, and then the next day, about half as much for less than an hour. And if you look at this graphic, the blue line is showing their load, and the orange line is showing their net load. So that's the load minus the wind minus the solar is what the orange line is. And you'll note that these load shed events that are shown here in gray, they occur not when the load is peaking, but rather when the net load is peaking. And you can see that in both of these. Now, this was California in 2020. On the right, this is Texas. This is ERCOT during Winter Storm Uri in February 2021. And you can see here, they shed up to 20,000 megawatts for up to 3 days. So that's up to a third of their total load for 3 days. And these two, while they are roughly a day and 10-year loss of load events, are very different. Here, the Californians barely noticed this. And here, the Texans, 4.5 million Texans didn't have power. It was extremely cold. Over 200 people died. So they're very different events, even though they might roughly hit the planning criteria. So what we can learn is that not all shortfalls are alike. We need to characterize not just 1 day in 10 years, but also the size, the frequency, the duration, and the timing of events. We can also learn the risk period is shifting. So it used to be that peak load was the main period of concern, but now it's moving to net peak load, or maybe to winter events where you have correlated thermal outages, or maybe periods of calm, cloudy days when wind and solar output is low. So you need to look across an entire year of operation, not just at peak. And today's power system is increasingly weather driven. it's not just because of wind and solar, which are, of course, a main driver of the weather-driven nature of the system, but it's also electrification. So we're electrifying, heat pumps in buildings. It's also correlated outages across thermal generators. And now we have climate change also impacting extreme events. And it's not just, do I have enough capacity or megawatts on the system? It used to be that having enough capacity or megawatts was what you cared about. Now with electrification on top of this, with systems that are moving from summer to winter peaking, it's not just about the megawatts that you've installed, it's also about how much megawatt hours or energy is available. Because if you have a 4-hour battery and you have a 3-day outage, that 4-hour battery can only help you so much in a multiple day or even just an 8-hour shortfall. So some of the things we're thinking about in industry is moving to multiple metrics, because a single metric doesn't give you enough information. And as an example, this is PJM. On the left, this is their loss of load expectation metric, so 1 day in 10 years. And you can see that if you look at loss of load expectation, it's the summer events that drive risk, right? In this middle graphic, if you look at loss of load hours, they're pretty much evenly divided between summer and winter. And for this metric here, expected unserved energy, this is looking at the number of megawatt hours that you have a loss of load for. And here you can see that it's really the winter that drives this risk. And that's because even though there are fewer winter events, when they do occur, they're larger events and they're more impactful. So being able to look across different metrics is becoming increasingly important. So we all know wind and solar are correlated with weather. It turns out that all technologies, hydro, nuclear, gas, coal, they're all prone to outages at extreme temperatures, especially extreme cold. So for those of you who might remember Winter Storm Elliott in December 2022, there were 90,000 megawatts of coincident unplanned outages then. So about 13% of the resources that were anticipated to be online were out unexpectedly. And as a result of these wide-scale outages, they had firm load shed in the Southeast. It included TVA, Duke, other utilities. It exceeded 5,000 megawatts. It wasn't a peak load event. It wasn't a peak net load event. And there were a lot of causes, but if you look at the root cause of those different causes, it was mostly driven by extreme cold. And traditionally, industry had not taken into account these kinds of things. So if you look here on the left, one of the things we need to do to measure the contribution of a resource to resource adequacy is a framework called capacity accreditation. It's just an accounting framework. It's just a way to count the contribution of each resource. And you do it to ensure that you have a resource adequate system, to see if you're overbuilding or underbuilding. And there's 3 kinds of capacity accreditation frameworks that are common. So the first one, the simplest one, maybe the one that we used to use a long time ago, installed capacity, just this blue bar. I've got a 100 megawatt gas turbine, and it gives me, I accredit it for 100% of that. So I give it 100% or 100 megawatts of capacity credit in that framework. That framework is often called ICAP. A slightly better framework would account for those unplanned, unexpected outages. So that would be this blue bar minus this first red bar of the forced outage rate. So 100% minus 5%. So it's 95%. So that 100 megawatt gas turbine in this slightly better framework would have a 95 megawatt capacity credit. That's called UCAP. Now, in a more accurate framework, you would model each generator, you would determine its equivalent of perfect capacity, and you would capture the interactions with the rest of the fleet, fuel supply issues, weather-dependent outages, portfolio effects, in this kind of perfect capacity framework. And I'll describe the modeling. The capacity credit of the generator is called the effective load carrying capability, or ELCC, and that's shown here by the black bar. So in that more accurate framework, this gas turbine would have a capacity credit of, say, 76 megawatts. Now, to capture this capacity credit, what we do is we model the system under many conditions, and we look at the probability of there being a shortage, a loss of load event. For example, you could take random draws of the probability that multiple generators are out at the same time, and you could run each of these draws against different weather years, right? You would want to look at many weather years. You want to capture a high wind year, a hot year, a drought year, a wet year, and then you want to simulate for each of these years the 8760 hours of load, of solar, of wind, and you want to look at this chronology, the 8760, because you want to know, is your storage charged? You want to know, can I call on the demand response, or did I already call on it earlier today? And the only way to get at that is by looking at the chronology. So you could be simulating in this model millions of hours, and then you'd count up the loss of load events and see if you've hit that metric, whatever metric you have. It could be 1 day in 10 years or whatever you've set. Now, this framework also informs your resource planning. So you can first tune your system so that you have exactly hit this metric that you have. Let's say it's 1 day in 10 years. You can exactly tune it with the exact right amount of perfect resources. And you can translate that perfect resource requirement into a planning reserve margin. So the amount of perfect resources it takes to exactly hit this 1 day in 10 year criteria, let's say the amount of perfect resources it takes is 15% more than the median peak demand, then that 15% would be your planning reserve margin. And then finally, with this framework, you can calculate for every resource how much effective capacity or effective load carrying capability, ELCC, it provides. So you start with a system in the middle that's exactly perfectly hitting your metric. You add in, let's say you're looking at a wind plant. You add in that wind plant to the system. Now the system's a little bit too reliable, more reliable than your metric. You subtract out some amount of perfect capacity to get it back to your metric. And that amount of perfect capacity that you just subtracted, that's your resource's effective capacity. Now, it's important to note that some resources interact. For example, when you first install solar on a system, it can have a significant capacity credit because, let's say, it's aligned with peak load when your system is most stressed. Now, as you add more and more solar, the net peak load, so the load minus the solar, it sort of carves out this tranche here in your net load, and it moves the net load peak to the right, to later in the afternoon, and eventually into the evening. And eventually, adding more solar doesn't help you at all with that net peak load. Similarly, with a battery, at first, a 4-hour battery can help you a lot. It basically helps you flatten out this peak here. But as you add in more and more 4-hour batteries, this net load shape flattens enough that more 4-hour batteries don't really help you. You either need a longer duration battery, or you need, or you have a dwindling contribution of 4-hour batteries to resource adequacy. Now, conversely, on the right, resources can also be synergistic. So on the right, you can see that we've got solar and storage here. And when we add both of these in, it's a little hard to point to, but the solar makes the net peak load more narrow. And as it makes it more narrow, that gives more of an ability for the storage to help flatten out that net load peak and help provide a strong contribution to resource adequacy. And what happens is the total capacity credit of the solar storage resource can be greater than the capacity credit from the solar alone plus the capacity credit from the storage alone. So it's a diversity effect. Now, another important factor is transmission to your neighbors. We saw in Winter Storm Elliott that neighbors and neighbors were able to help the Southeast. And here at ESIG, we did a study of Texas and Southern Company and found that if we put a 2 gigawatt transmission line between the two, it improved resource adequacy, acting like 4 gigawatts of new firm capacity. It basically acted like 2 gigawatts of capacity in the ERCOT region to help with their stress period in the winter, and it acted like 2 gigawatts of new capacity in Southern Company to help them with their summer stress period. And just an example of how transmission and neighbors can help to reduce capacity needs can be seen in the history of SPP, Southwest Power Pool. So as SPP grew from, a couple states to more and more states, and they built transmission to connect the diversity across the region, they were able to reduce their planning reserve margin from 17.6 down to 13.6 down to 12% and save money every year by building less capacity. And here in the West, we have the Western Resource Adequacy Program, which today is a way to coordinate resources and share when someone's having a stress event, but in the future could do more and help regions reduce their planning reserve margins. And then finally, I just want to mention demand flexibility can reduce the amount of capacity that you need to build. Rate design, DER programs, these are all really important ways to get at this. On the left, this is from Excel, and it's just showing, this is their peak day last year. And it's just showing that the time of use rate customers compared to the non-time of use rate customers reduced their peak load by on the order of 4%. On the right, this is from Arizona Public Service. They have some of the highest take-up, have traditionally had some of the highest take-up of time of use rates in the country. This graphic is just showing deployment of their DER programs. They use that to manage their net peak load and also the transition from their peak to off-peak periods. And I'll just note that this particular graphic is showing August 2020, the same day when California had their loss of load event that I showed earlier. They were able to use the DER and the time of use rates to help obviate the need for any kind of load shed. So I realize I'm running out of time. In summary, we've got a number of principles, and this QR code will take you to some of those resources. But thank you very much.
That was excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie. Our plan at this point is to move to speaker number 2 within this panel, which is the North American Electric Liability Corporation and Western Electricity Coordinating Council. And then after they share, we will have questions and comments. Welcome from anyone at all.
All right, give me just a moment. I will get my screen shared. All right, just a quick confirmation that worked.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. All right. My name is Katie Rogers. I'm the manager of reliability assessments at WEC. I'm going to kick us off, but Mark, do you want to introduce yourself real quick as well, and then we'll get going?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katie. Mark Olson, Manager of Reliability Assessments at the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
All right, I'm going to get us kicked off here. So there's actually a handful of resource adequacy assessments that come out of both NERC and WEC. And so I wanted to take a few minutes to try to provide a little bit more clarity in case some of you are going, oh my goodness, there's tons of acronyms, tons of reports, and I just don't get what the difference is. So WEC works really closely with our other regional entities and then of course NERC to put together a couple assessments. So one of the major ones is called the Long-Term Reliability Assessment, or the LTRA. And that is a larger assessment that looks out over 10 years and focuses on planning reserve margins. In coordination with that one is the probabilistic assessment, sometimes referred to as the Prob-A. And like I said, it comes out with the LTRA and provides some enhanced metrics on resource adequacy. There is also 2 seasonal assessments, the summer reliability assessment and then a winter one. The winter one is under review right now and will be shared here soon. And it looks specifically at the coming season. So the winter one will come out looking at this winter, and then we'll roll into the summer assessment for the 2026 summer perspective. Out of WEC, we do other assessments as well, but we have one that we produce regularly called the Western Assessment of Resource Adequacy, or the Western Assessment. And that's where we focus specifically on resource adequacy in the Western interconnection. Now, in case a lot of words is not what you prefer, here's a table. I won't necessarily go through all of this, but this is, again, to just kind of help everyone understand a little bit of the difference. While they're all very similar, and in fact, they use the same input data and the same tools, they're asking different questions and therefore looking at slightly different things. So again, just to kind of highlight that the LTRA is over 10 years, but it really focuses on the first 5, whereas the Prob-A is going to focus on those first 2 and 4 years, year 2 and 4, it's a better way to say that. And again, the seasonal ones are just for the next season, and our Western assessment looks at the whole 10 years. And then depending on the assessment, they're all going to look at energy, but whether or not they look at capacity as well. I'll pause for a moment because I know this is a lot of words, and I believe you guys will have the slides too. So if you want to look at this more in depth, then I'll just say, if anyone has questions that you think of after this, you're welcome to reach out to myself or to Mark after today as well, and we can answer any questions that you have. All right. The last thing I want to share right now is that WEC is making a change in how we categorize or show, I guess, our subregions. And so the map on the left is prior to today, prior to this year's work. You'll see the Northwest was a big blue bubble, and you lost a lot of detail because of just the sheer number of states and utilities that are included in that area. So we worked with NERC to align our subregion boundaries with our other WEC products and to provide a little bit more granularity in detail. So the map on the right is how our results will be shown going forward. And I believe actually the summer reliability assessment from this year already started using this map. So not only will the NERC assessments be using this map for the Western interconnection, but our WEC products will also use this. I know there's previously been questions like with our anchor data set, which is our production cost model, and it didn't align with some of our resource adequacy maps. And so now they do align. Fantastic. So hopefully that provides a bit more clarity. I'm going to pass it to Mark to share some of what they're seeing at the NERC level side, and then we'll get into more details specifically on the West.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Katie. Thanks to you all for inviting me to join. It's really great that we're pairing up with WEC to give this presentation, because as Katie showed the spectrum of our reliability assessments, really the NERC one and the Western assessment for resource adequacy, they complement each other. So we're focused on providing the North American view, but WEC is really able to deliver the key insights for the Western interconnection. Maybe one of the values to the NERC assessment is that we are applying criteria to a resource adequacy assessment across all of North America and using the same criteria. So it does provide for a benchmarking and for an ability to see things in relation to other parts of the grid. But really, we're using the same data, and we rely heavily on WEC's analysis. So go ahead to the next slide, and I'll start talking about some of the things, some of the trends from the 2024 long-term reliability assessment. This was based on the map that Katie showed of the older assessment areas. We're tooling up for the new assessment, and that'll use the new mapping that she showed, which has a bit of a smaller footprint for the Northwest area. So you'll get more of a tailored look that could be more appropriate for the Washington State area. But for the 2024 LTRA, we used the larger map. I think your group here obviously understands the problem. You've given a number of meetings and time to looking at resource adequacy, so you get the problem. The challenges I think that the North American power system are facing is underscoring the importance you need to plan for demand growth and for the around-the-clock energy needs of your system. And it's happening in an increasingly complex environment of demand and demand behaviors, demand growth, and then more complex resource mix. I'll show a few slides where we'll talk about our assessment of the risks across North America. Those are being influenced by generator retirements, which are happening at a high rate. That's not so much a challenge, I think, in Washington State, but nonetheless, the balance of resources to meet that growing demand is really the crux of the challenge. I'll talk about the trends in the demand growth and what we're seeing in resource additions in North America and transmission development. If you go to the next slide, we have our risk map. First thing I'd like to do is talk about the inputs that go into making this risk assessment. Katie showed the probabilistic assessment, the Prob-A, which focuses on 2 years. We also gather that load and resource information that WEC collects that can be used to base for planning reserve margins. So these inputs that we use give us a look into the first 5 years of your ability of your resources to meet expected demand. Debbie's presentation earlier about the resource adequacy challenges had a number of really key insights to it about the importance of having robust risk criteria for evaluating when shortfalls could occur, how long they might occur, how severe and deep they might be, how many megawatts. We're using a criteria that is described in a NERC and National Academies report. In addition to the more traditional 1 day and 10 criteria, we're using these expanded criteria, which includes unserved energy metrics and loss of load hours. So we apply those in determining risk and have developed what you're seeing here as our risk map, where we'll characterize areas as high risk, elevated risk, or normal risk. At the one end of the spectrum, the high risk areas generally aren't meeting their 1 day and 10 criteria for loss of load hours or loss of load expectation, or they have a significant amount of unserved energy above a normalized criteria that we use. The other end of the spectrum, which in the 2024 LTRA included the Northwest, is the normal risk. They're meeting their criteria, and are expected to have sufficient resources for the range of conditions that we assessed. If you click it one more time, you'll see the kind of the risk drivers that are taking place across North America. A lot of demand growth affecting a number of these areas. Generator retirements, particularly in some of the market areas where there is less assurance about whether the generators will stick around in response to growing demand. And then some areas, dispatchable generation is dwindling as a share of resources. You could think of this as traditional thermal generators or hydro. A lot of thermal generators are retiring, demand is growing, and the new resources coming in lack some of those attributes that allow them to be dispatched to meet growing demand. Next slide, I'll show some of the trends, and really when Katie, I'm going to pass the baton back to Katie soon, and she can talk more specifically about the trends in the West. But we see the WEC Northwest region, as we had it, as one of the top assessment areas for demand growth, in the top third of all the areas. Demand growth trend in last year's LTRA showed a significant acceleration over the prior two LTRAs that we did. And that's what the chart in the upper right is showing, is that growth trajectory for 3 different LTRAs, and the most recent one, the 2024 LTRA, had that 17% growth over a 10-year period, a significant increase over the prior years. We're getting ready with the 2025 LTRA, and the trend is, of course, it is not surprisingly continuing to accelerate even higher growth rate projections. Another interesting thing is that winter growth is really outpacing summer. Debbie Liu highlighted some of the unique challenges of the winter, and that makes it really important that resource adequacy consider how you're meeting those winter challenges, because load loss and unserved energy can be so dire in winter, and that's where that growth rate is outpacing the summer growth, which is already high. The drivers for demand growth across North America, largely data centers, but there's also industrialization and electrification of various sectors as being primary drivers. This risk map that we're showing here, or the map of demand growth drivers, is from narrative information that we collect from all of our regions and assessment areas. Go ahead to the next slide. Other trends we're looking at, the resource mix change is fueling some of those energy risks that are popping up in the risk map before. Generator retirements and projections of generator retirements, they do vary, but with the amount of resources retiring and the demand growth, that's contributing to some capacity shortfalls, but also, as I mentioned, that declining dispatchable resource trend. On the right, you can see what's in our new resource queues, and about 15% of that new resource queue can be dispatched, gas-fired or battery type of resources, but a large portion of it, 85%, is solar resources and some wind, which has less dispatchable capability than your thermal fleet. Next slide. Other trends to talk quickly. We noted that resources are coming in slower than they had been projected from the prior LTRA. This is not to say we're not building tremendous amount of resources, and a lot of new resources are connecting, because they certainly are, and they're connecting faster than they have in the past. But the projections that the industry has for resource additions are higher than what is actually connecting. And that's a worrying trend that we noted in the LTRA and will continue to monitor. Some of the delays, though, are supply chain issues or permitting and engineering challenges, as reported in the narrative information we collect. Next slide is, I think, maybe my last before I pass it back to Katie here. I mentioned winter reliability as a growing concern because the demand growth there. The other piece or flipped part of this coin is that the new resources that are largely connecting to the system are solar and some batteries of 4-hour duration, which they can help a lot in the summer, but in the wintertime, when demand often peaks during hours of darkness, really the resource mix is becoming increasingly challenged to deal with demand growth and winter demand. Natural gas fuel remains an important fuel supply, fuel source for meeting winter demand challenges. And much of North America relies heavily on gas-fired generation to meet their winter demand. This chart is basically showing how much of the generating capacity for winter peaks is coming from gas-fired generation in each of our areas. So those are some of the big trends. I see a question coming up. BPS is an acronym for the bulk power system, which we mean is the interconnected transmission system and the large generators that make it work. With that, I'll turn it over to Katie to continue on the next slide.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So Mark shared a lot of what's being seen at, again, that North American perspective. I'm going to try to bring it down a little bit lower to the Western interconnection or the Northwest perspective. I wanted to start with just kind of level setting. So we get all of our data through what we call the loads and resources, or the LNR data request. And that we go out annually and we ask balancing authorities. They go collect the data from the utilities in their area, and then they aggregate it and then provide it to us, and then we aggregate it and perform studies and analysis on it. So the next couple slides are just the data that we're getting from balancing authorities. No, no modeling or anything done on it. This is just purely what we're hearing from our utilities and BAs. So here is just a profile of the generation capacity in the Northwest. The blue bar represents the existing. Obviously, majority of it is conventional hydro with some natural gas, wind, and a little bit of coal. The yellow, green, and red boxes or portions share those the resources anticipated to come on. And tier 1 is less speculative, more definitive and most likely to happen, all the way out to tier 3. That is, very speculative, probably very little detail is known, but they anticipate needing something that looks sort of like this. So you can see that those future resources, those tier 1, 2, and 3, are primarily in that solar, wind, battery space, and a little bit of hybrid. And hybrid just it refers to combined units of either solar or wind with battery. So let's see. So as far as resource additions, this is Western interconnection wide. We're looking at 177 gigawatts over the next decade. And again, looking at the graph on the right, the blue bars are wind, the yellow bars are solar, and those red portions of the bar are battery. And you can see that's primarily what's being built out across the whole spectrum, except 2035. And obviously those resources are all inverter-based resources. And so that's what 90% then of our additions are looking like. And I guess just to say, for our 2024 Western assessment, we did see some loss of load hours in each of the scenarios that we looked at. All right, so resource additions specifically in the Northwest. Again, the blue, yellow, and red are the same. So wind, solar, and battery. And you can see that's still primarily the hybrid. Again, in this case, specifically for the Northwest, is a pretty even split between solar plus battery or wind plus battery. We just break them out a little bit separately for this graph. And then there's a small amount of biomass and geothermal that are anticipated as well. All right, so we talked about what's coming on. Let's talk about what's leaving. So the planned retirements for the Northwest are predominantly biomass with some wind, hydro, solar, and a little bit of natural gas. And you can see again on the graph how those are spread out over that next 10 years perspective. So obviously the other side of the equation to resources is demand. In the Northwest subregion specifically, our annual demand from 2026 to 2035 is anticipated to grow by almost 24% and peak demand almost at 21%. And at the risk of explaining something that everybody knows, I will just say, for those that maybe don't and are embarrassed to ask, annual demand is the summation of the demand over the entire year, whereas the peak demand is that highest hour. So that could shift around to different days, different hours of the day, depending on the year and what the forecast is for that time. So you can see when we looked at annual demand, our annual demand actually was a little bit lower in the near term and then kind of matched what we were seeing for our previous assessment. Whereas the peak demand out in those further out years, now we're projecting that our peak demand is going to be a little bit higher than what we observed in the last assessment. So what does that look like over the course of a day? So this graph, along the bottom row are hours, and what that is showing is the hourly demand for the day that has the peak hour, if that makes sense. So you can see it's generally a dual peaking day, and those blue lines are the further out years, further back you go. And then as you get closer to current time, in general, except for that 2023 line, in general, that demand is both increasing in both peak and daily demand for that peak day. Okay, so again, that was all of the inputs. Then we take all of that and we run it through our model and then get our assessment results. Mark already shared this, but just to kind of touch on it. So this, again, was last year's LTRA results, where at least in the Western Interconnection, we only saw higher than normal risk in the BC and Canada-Mexico subregions. Most of the results that I'm going to share now are going forward, so not based on last year's, but kind of what we're seeing currently. So for 2025, when we look at the planning reserve margin, specifically in the Northwest, you can see that in those later out years, we do drop below that reference margin level. And I'll just add right now, these are all potentials based on probabilities. They're not definites. If anyone has the magic 8-ball that tells the exact future, I would be really interested in talking to you about that. Otherwise, we do the best we can to try to predict, again, based on what's been observed historically and what we know going forward. So these are potentials based on probabilities, not necessarily definites. This is a little bit of the output from that Prob A analysis, specifically for the Northwest. That top graph, sorry, I know this is a graph heavy slide. That top graph really speaks to the resource portfolio, so we won't talk too much about that. The graph on the bottom is the distribution of both the demand and the supply, so that you can see kind of where the hours tend to fit in those megawatt amounts. And then the graph on the right is that volatility. How much does demand in the blue or supply in the green, how much could it deviate from the expected? So you can see that the demand could deviate just over 20% from kind of what the expected would be. But supply, it could be up to 50%. So, and a lot of that comes in with like those variable resources, right? That variability is going to increase as we, don't necessarily know what solar and wind are going to do for sure. So as far as the potential loss of load hours that we're seeing in our results, this is in the timing of those hours. This heat map on the right is from 2029. And the way you read it is that months are going to be along the top, hours along the side. And it is just a count of how many loss of load hours were observed in that month, in that hour of the day. So you can see we primarily saw loss of load occurring in January. But when you look across when during the day those tend to happen, it's the afternoon to evening hours that they're being observed. And then like Debbie and Mark pointed out, it's not enough to say that you have a loss of load hour, because 1 megawatt is very different than 1 gigawatt of loss of load. So here is a graph that kind of shows the magnitude of that potential loss of load. So while most of the loss of load hours that were observed had a very small magnitude of load that was lost, we did observe a simulated event in August of 2029 that could potentially reach a gigawatt. Again, none of this is definitive. It's all based on potentials and probabilistics, but that's a big one. So what's driving this? Mark's already talked a lot about this, but at the risk of duplicating what he's already said, generator retirements, my apologies, are going to be a big driver, especially as we're moving from base load units that you could dispatch at any time at any level that was needed to backfilling those with variable resources. That escalating demand growth, right? At the same time that we're changing our generation fleets, we're also seeing an expected increase in demand, and that large load growth presents a lot of uncertainty. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then as we're getting rid of things like coal units and relying more heavily on gas, we're realizing that this the electric system is much more dependent now on things that happen in the gas system. So if there are events that are happening over there, they could have a much bigger impact on the electric system as we increase our reliance on the gas system. Mark again touched on transmission development. Not only is it just innately a bigger beast, all of the hands, all of the approval, all of the things that have to, that new transmission has to go through, but now we're also seeing those supply chain delays of getting the parts that are needed to build things, which brings us into supply chain delays. As units are having failures or going into maintenance and needing to be brought back online, that delay of getting those parts is then delaying the ability for those units to come back online or be available as they're needed. And then that touches that aging thermal resources. As those thermal resources get older, they're going to have more problems. You have more supply chain delays, and you could see how that all starts to build up. And then again, that renewable resource variability. We stole the graphic that Mark showed already from the LTRA, but just to drive home that point of it's while we have resources, that variability of the resources really impacts that reliability component. So large loads, I just wanted to share. So this is 3 years across the Western interconnection. The blue sections of the bar indicate the amount of large loads that are built into the load forecast, and the yellow sections indicate the amount that is very speculative, but could come to fruition. So while we weren't confident enough, or utilities weren't confident enough to include it in their load forecast, there's still that potential of this additional growth that could happen. And so you can see as you move out to say 2035, those yellow bars get a lot bigger, which means that ability to forecast the demand gets a lot tougher. And then I think the last thing I'm going to bring up is just, many of the regions, but especially the Northwest, all indicated that extreme weather was definitely a concern. Obviously, we know the impacts it can have on, taking down transmission lines, derating, or taking offline generating resources. Plus, you have high temperatures that can increase your load. So lots of opportunities for risk potential, I guess. The left map shows September through November and kind of how the temperatures are higher than expected, and then the middle one is December to February. Less of an impact in the Northwest, but still something to be aware of, because impacts in other parts of the Western interconnection, those do trickle into the other subregions, right? When you talk about import availability or needing to export for others' needs. And then the last map on the right just looks at wildfire potential and how that risk, again, can impact those reliability concerns. All right, that's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Mark to share some of the recommendations that came out of the LTRA from NERC.
I think, thanks, Katie. That was really, hopefully you see how that complements what we do at NERC in our LTRA. I know we're kind of up on the agenda stop, so we can, I leave it to the commission if you want to move to the question and answers. We've pretty much wrapped up what we had presented, and can take questions from you.
That was very, very helpful information, very clear from all of our speakers so far. Thank you so much. Just a couple logistics about questions and answers so that everyone feels included here. We will start with questions from our bench, from our hosts. If you have a question on Zoom, you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature. I believe it's in the reactions bar. Yes, it is. If you're attending on the phone, *9 raises your hand, *6 mutes and unmutes you. And you are also welcome to type your question into chat. I see we have at least one question that has not been answered yet that's in the chat. If you're in the room, we would love your questions, and we would ask you to come up to one of the empty chairs here, and we will make sure that you get a mic. So with that, first, I'll hand it to our bench for their first questions.
Thank you. This is Glenn Blackman with the Department of Commerce. I wanted to maybe see if Mark could slip in one of the slides that he ran out of time for. And that's because of the integrity of the data that's being submitted. This has been a recurring concern, and that the assessments can't really be trusted if the data that goes into them is not, reliable. So anyway, Mark, if you could talk, or perhaps Katie too, about the efforts that your organizations are making to make the data that goes into these analyses more trustworthy. I would appreciate that.
Yep, and if you'll permit me, I will share that slide, and that, yeah, there we go. We did want to talk with you all. We do take data very seriously, as we talked about with Katie. We rely on our regional entities to collect data from their industry partners, and we have a pretty elaborate process of requesting data, defining what we need, and then moving into the collection and studies and performing assessment and reviewing. Good data is at the heart of having a good reliability assessment. Earlier this year, we did have an issue with the 2024 LTRA where we found that some of the submitted data didn't follow the criteria that we laid out in our data instruction, and it didn't get picked up in the review processes that we have. And we've done a lot to redouble the effort so that this would not happen again in 2025 or later. We did determine that it was isolated to just the one assessment area in the Midwest. What we have done to ensure good quality data is very senior level engagement with utilities about the importance of reviewing internal processes. We've taken our own steps at NERC to ensure our internal processes are capable of catching these issues, and the regional entities that collect our data have done the same. We've really stepped up the peer review guidance this year to be able to detect the type of problem that we saw in the data last year, which was essentially a mismatch in the capacity accounting approach that which when applied to that reference margin level made it a bad comparison in terms of adequacy risk. So we've done a lot in the near term for this year to ensure that we would not see a repeat of that problem. And then looking into the future, our NERC and the regional entities are working on some more system-based approaches that would be able to ensure that that would minimize the error vectors and ensure that we have high quality data without requiring such a manual effort that currently is required by this process. So yeah, we do take it very seriously. We rely on good data coming from the utilities and through our regional entities, and our process is it will ensure that we get good outcomes in the future.
Glenn, I'll just add too, one thing that WEC has implemented this year in response to some of the data questions that went out before as well. And everything that Mark said, 100% stand behind it. And before we release results, we are actively going out and talking to the sub-regional entities to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Does this align with what you're expecting? Because sometimes we don't know that maybe we had a data mismatch or a data misunderstanding. And so we're actively trying to have those conversations to say, hey, does this align with what you were expecting? Because if not, maybe there is something we need to dive into and try to resolve. So we want to get good data on the front end, and we're trying to be more proactive about talking to people and making sure that we're on the same page with what the data is showing.
Perfect. Thank you for that. This is Director Wynn. I had a question. Maybe it's a follow-up as well around data quality, but there was one slide that had energy forecast in terms of generation, new generation, and by 2030, there was a pretty significant spike, an increase in load. Can we go back to that slide? I'm not quite sure which one it was. So basically a few years, you'll have flat to not much in terms of generation. 2030, pretty significant jump. So it looks like it's slide 15, planned resource additions in the Northwest. I was more just curious to get a better understanding of that. So I read this as we're not going to build very much, and then all of a sudden build a lot in 2030, and then not build much again. But I could just be misinterpreting how this is being calculated.
Yeah, this isn't a calculation. This is what we're hearing from utilities through their BA aggregation and submitted data. So do we
have a confidence that this is accurate?
We are working on how we measure like the quality of data. As far as like right now, we just recently rolled out communication that helps share back with utilities how we thought their the actual submittal of data went, whether it was timely, whether it was complete. As far as whether or not this is correct, this is the data we were given. We're working on how we would evaluate whether or not this is right or wrong, but this is
So I think that's my point being is that if the data is just being aggregated by folks who are providing it to us, it would be good to see how many of these are in the permitting process or have site under acquisition or have interconnection queues lined up. Because I will say, as somebody who has traveled across Washington State, looking at energy projects, this would give me some concern. And I'll pause. I have a second question as well. There was a slide around peak demand for gas in the wintertime. And then I think the WEC areas, one of the regions had 86% was our load from gas in the wintertime. Is that correct?
11.
I think
This
it's
guy
that one.
here.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. So 80, those 80s numbers. So in Alberta, that number tells you that of their total winter
Okay,
resource
yeah, that makes
mix,
more sense.
capacity, yeah, 83% of it is a gas-fired.
Okay, so ours
gas-fired
is about
generation.
40% peak then in the Northwest is what I'm looking at.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, I almost had a heart attack. I was going to say there's no way we'll be able to make that
Oh.
with our CETA goals, but 39% is a little bit more manageable.
Right, and these, I will highlight, this is the old WEC Northwest map. As Katie showed, there's a new one. So we have, I think we could even give more granular numbers now that are more appropriate for Washington State with the new map, which is smaller. But from last year, yeah, this is the WEC Northwest gas fire generation contribution.
Yeah, I think so. Glenn just said Las Vegas counts as the Northwest, but I think in general, in terms of NERC calculations, when you have, say, for instance, 33 gigawatts of firm from gas, what would be the nameplate required to replace firm, right? If you were using renewables, is there like a multiplier that you would use? So say, for instance, 1 gig of gas probably equates to 5 or 6 gigs of renewable that's intermittent. Do you have a sense of what that might look like?
Yeah, those do vary by areas. So we, so for the LTRA, what we're using what's submitted to us from each of the assessment areas or regions. Many of those could have been calculated through an ELCC method, like Debbie showed earlier, but more commonly they were historical based. So you might see a wind capacity contribution of in the neighborhood of 30, 35, 40% in winter. Most solar in winter is getting a zero capacity contribution because it's considering a peak demand hour that is probably in a time of darkness. So it does vary, but generally, your wind and your solar for winter contributions are less than 50% for wind for most areas. It depends on the historical records and data for what the resources can produce.
Perfect. Thank you.
A couple of quick follow-ups. Well, one quick follow-up, more of a comment. To Director Wynn's point on the 2030 additions, I know Katie and Mark, you're saying, or Katie, you're saying that's the numbers that are coming to us from our utilities, but in a way that sort of shows the risk of when we look at it from an integrated resource plan perspective of a model that will say the least cost option is to wait until the very moment of compliance being needed, and that's when we add the resource in the model, and that's we see this over and over, and that. I think it's a great recognition of that's not how the world really works. And so that sort of drawing those between modeling and how the world really works is where we need to buckle down in our own work. At the risk of buying into the old adage that comparison is the thief of joy, just want to bring back up the map that showed the different risk levels. And I think this was maybe shown to give us, some peace and calm here during the meeting that it could be worse, right? It makes me very happy about the fact that I don't work at MISO anymore. But I worry that as we went through the rest of this presentation, that normal is changing. What is normal risk has actually gotten riskier. And I wonder if you could answer that, because when I hear about the resource changes, when I hear about the demand behavior changes, I worry that maybe what is normal risk is not the same as normal 5 years ago. So Mark or Katie, if you want to address that.
Well, I'll also say, just to make it as confusing as possible, we mixed both LTRA results that have been published and preliminary results that have not been shared yet for this one. So this map is for last year's LTRA. The LTRA for this year is being reviewed. The modeling has been completed. The results have been shared in the NERC subcommittees, and so we mixed two different sets of results. And so, to your point, we actually are seeing more risk in this newer set of data than we did in the prior year. And yeah, there's just not as much of a definition of normal anymore, right? It used to be you could count on something staying the same, and we're pretty much now saying weather's not going to stay the same, load's not going to stay the same, our resource mix isn't going to stay the same, and so that definition of normal is definitely shifting.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'd also add, some of the risks of not adding, the normal projection, or to be a normal risk area here means you're meeting resource adequacy criteria. It's based on, could be based on what you're planning to add. And I think supply chain issues are definitely starting to highlight the upcoming long-term reliability assessment. They've played a role in the past, but we're hearing more and more concern about supply chain issues. So the ability to add resources and stay above water and stay in that normal risk is a concern that I think every area has to be concerned about in this era of demand growth. And the second point I think I would make is it is a more complex power system with the types of loads and the way large loads behave adds to that complexity. And then the resource mix becoming more complex, and the inverter-based resource performance issues, which a lot is being done to try to tackle those, makes for a lot of operating challenges. So there's a lot of truth to what you're saying, with a normal risk being still a risky scenario. Our normal is talking about resource adequacy, but really the operating reliability and the ability to operate this system as it's evolving is becoming more challenging. And there's a lot of work to be done to plan the system to be able to minimize those operating risks and exposure.
Thank you very much. We are eating into break a little bit here. I just want to call folks' attention, those on the phone, that we're having a lively conversation in chat. I apologize, we don't have time to summarize what was said in chat, but because we're low on time, I'm hoping that Mark from NERC can respond to a couple questions from the bench and from the public in chat. That would be great. And next Q&A, we will try to do a better job at making sure folks in the room can ask questions as well. At this time, it's 2:22. Let's break until 2:35. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for a great start so far. We are excited to welcome Arnie Olson from Energy and Environmental Economics Incorporated, E3, to talk about a pretty unique study that the utilities have commissioned regarding regional resource adequacy and the risks with the policy trends that are the case in Washington State. So I will turn it over to Arnie.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And thanks to the commissioners, Director Wynn, for the opportunity to come and talk to you today about the study. If you can go ahead and just click to the next slide, just a little bit of introduction to our study. My name is Arnie Olson. I'm a senior partner with Energy and Environmental Economics. We're a San Francisco-based consulting firm. I've got a little bit of information in the deck about who E3 is, but before we go there, just to give you the summary of the highlights right up front in slide one, we're engaged by a number of the Northwest entities. It's not just the utilities. The sponsors are all there on the right, so it's 22 or 3 utilities, I forget the count, but then also the Northwestern Independent Power Producer Coalition is also part of our study group. So it's quite a broad-based group that's gotten together because of the concerns that they have about resource adequacy in the Northwest in the near term and the long term. And just to highlight the findings of our phase 1 study is that accelerated load growth and retirements are creating a gap. And by 2030, the current numbers are showing that that gap will grow to 9 gigawatts of capacity that's needed by 2030, which is approximately the the size of the electric load of the state of Oregon. So it's quite a significant gap. The preferred resources that most of the entities are developing, such as wind, solar, and batteries, because of the unique nature of the Northwest system that we've already heard something about, really only makes a small contribution to meeting those resource adequacy needs. And so we'll go through that in some detail. And then lastly, that I think everyone is aware, but it's very significant, that timely development of all forms of new resources is really challenged right now, given supply chain issues and given federal policy headwinds, I'll put it. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a little bit of background about E3. We're a large consulting firm, as I mentioned, focused primarily on the clean energy transition. We have kind of three different practice areas. One is sort of climate policy, energy policy. We do a lot of work with utilities and system planning. That's the group that I lead. And we do a lot of work with transactions on the commercial side with developers as well. Go to the next slide. Just to highlight a couple of examples of our experience. So do a lot of work with state agencies on deep decarbonization pathways type of analyses of the type that's been done for the Washington Energy Strategy. We built kind of the first version of a deep decarbonization pathways model for California back in about 2010. Continue to have the role supporting the Air Resources Board in its implementation of AB 32, which is a cap and trade law in California. And my group also supports the IRP proceeding in California, which is run by the commission staff. And so we do the modeling for the commission staff for the California IRP. Have similar roles in New York for NYSERDA with the climate action plan there. Recently have begun working a lot in Illinois. So we're doing a resource adequacy study for the Illinois Power Agency, and at the same time, a renewable transmission study for the Illinois Commerce Commission. And then I've listed a number of our utility clients there in the second bullet, and a bunch of stock car, logo thing on the right there. And I also want to mention that we do a lot of work with nonprofits as well, including had a longstanding relationship with NRDC, the Environmental Defense Fund, Climate Solutions, et cetera. So a fairly broad basis of clients. And we actually really work hard to make sure that we're representing not just one point of view, but really the industry as a whole. Go to the next slide. So we did a couple of studies like this one several years ago, 2017, 18, 19, kind of time frame, looking at both resource adequacy at that time, but also longer term low carbon scenarios, how we might meet our low carbon goals cost effectively. It's been a number of years since those studies were published, and a lot has happened. So I think the question that was motivating people is, what's new since then? What progress have we made? And there was a need for just a refreshed look at the problem. So a lot of things have happened. We've had the creation of the Western Resource Adequacy Program, which is intended programmatically to address some of these challenges. We've had, heat domes and wildfires that we hadn't had before. We've had a pandemic. We've had supply chain issues. A lot of things have happened. So really, we're kind of refreshing. And if you're familiar with the older study, we really are just refreshing that with this new and updated information. And of course, we also are very aware of and cognizant of and are bringing on board the findings from other studies done by the council and WAC, like we heard about, and others. Go to the next slide. Our study is going to use a two-phased modeling approach. Go ahead and click through. So phase one, we're looking at the resource adequacy picture today in the region, today meaning 2025 through 2030. So it's sort of a near-term status check. And then phase two, we'll look at long-term portfolio modeling. So how do we keep the lights on, serve our load reliably at low cost while meeting policy goals over the next 25-year time period? And if you go to just click once more. So looking at, in phase two, we'll look at solutions to the problems that we're identifying in phase one. So phase one is sort of near-term, what are the problems? Phase two is, depending on what problems we find, as we add solutions, how do those solutions play out over time? How do they help us or not meet our reliability goals and clean energy goals over time? So we're looking at things like barriers to new resource development, how to maintain long-term resource adequacy as the grid transitions to new and cleaner sources, roles for technologies like load flexibility, demand-side management, and emerging clean, firm resources. And if there is a need to invest in new resources for resource adequacy, is there a stranding risk as we move forward in time and our carbon goals get more and more stringent? Go to the next slide. Just go ahead and click that one more time. So we've heard already a lot about load forecasts and how they're going up over time. Here we're just gathering up some information from the Pacific Northwest Utility Conference Committee, which gathers load forecasts from the utility IRPs. That's the starting point for our study. We're not doing an independent load forecast. We're relying on the utilities for their forecasts. The one thing to note in this slide is that this shows their forecasts done every year between 2022 and 2025. And if you kind of follow the lines from the bottom to the top, each year that they've updated it, the forecast has gotten higher. And so now in 2025, the utilities collectively are forecasting for our region about a 3% growth rate annually over time, which is really something that's unprecedented. Most of us haven't seen that in our careers in this region and in most regions of the country. It's really, they're used to this in Arizona, in the desert Southwest, and maybe a little bit in Florida, but not so much in most of the rest of the country. So it's definitely something new. If you click again, the main drivers of this, we've heard about the data centers, air conditioning uptake in the Northwest is a big driver of increased summertime load. We're starting to see some noticeable load from electric vehicle adoption. And over the longer term, we expect electrification of buildings to create new load in the wintertime. And so you'll see that more in our phase 2 study. So this sort of creates the conditions that that the sector has to meet. Go to the next slide. When we look over the last 6 years of what resources have been added in the Northwest, and here I'll just note that our geography, go ahead and click again, our geography is sort of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and Western Wyoming, so the Pacific Northeast area of Wyoming. The geographies are always a little bit challenging for a region like the Northwest, but not including Nevada. So we don't have Las Vegas in the Northwest in our study. Or Reno, which you might argue is more suited. But if you look at the resources that have been added in that region over the last 6 years since 2018, it's been mostly, go ahead and click one more time. So what we've seen is retirements of existing firm generation, primarily coal generation, taking capacity off the system, up to a few thousand megawatts. Click again. Most of the additions have been wind and solar. That's wind in the blue and solar in the yellow in our charts. A little bit of purple, which is battery storage in our charts. So there's been several thousand megawatts of wind and solar added, but as we heard, those are not very effective at helping with capacity. So you need a lot of those megawatts to make up for the resources that we're losing on the left-hand side. And if you click again, we're just highlighting that most of the resources that have been added in Idaho and Wyoming and Utah. And there's really very little that's been added in the core Northwest, a couple thousand megawatts in Eastern Washington. So the picture that this chart tells is that over this period, we've been losing capacity and not gaining capacity. Go to the next slide. So I'm just going to cut straight to the numbers here. And I want to thank whoever, I assume it was Heather, I want to thank whoever was responsible for putting Debbie before me, because she did a great job of explaining the modeling that we did. So all the stuff that she talked about, we're doing all that behind the scenes. I don't have to explain it here. I'm going to go straight to the numbers and the results, but I'm happy to answer questions about any of the methodologies and how we applied them.
Perfect.
Do you have a clarifying question?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Obviously, what you're seeing is kind of what we're experiencing around the fact of new generation coming a lot slower than we would hope. We saw earlier in terms of the resource adequacy and even the IRPs from some of the utilities around 2030. Literally what you're describing is kind of what I fear, is that we're not actually building very quickly, yet we have some forecasts that say right before compliance, we're all going to be able to build. I personally don't think that is viable. Your data suggests that likely is the case as well. Just wanted to make sure that we're clarifying around how hard is it for us to build energy in Washington State?
Yeah, no, you're very much asking the right questions. So I'm going to go through the numbers first, and then we can talk about as a discussion how, what can we do about it.
Perfect.
But so our numbers are showing that there's a supply deficit as early as 2026, given of 1 gigawatt. That's just given growth between now and next year, and then some planned retirements over the next 12 months. That's including, I want to note an assumption of 3,750 megawatts of round-the-clock imports into our region. So it's an assumption. You should just be aware of it. It's probably a reasonable assumption, but there's probably some uncertainty about whether the rest of the WEC is going to have surplus power that they can send our way on a seasonal and daily basis. If you go to the next slide. By 2030, again, that gap grows to 9,000 megawatts. And you can see just the retirements and the load growing over time. Go click again. Of the projects that are currently in active development, so we saw the plans before. We've summarized that in projects that are in active development. And those projects account for about 3,000 megawatts of new capacity by 2030. So there are more projects behind these. There's certainly are many projects in utility IRPs. Development of all of these projects is challenged, much more challenged than in the past. So it looks like we'll get 3,000 megawatts from this group of resources and still have a 6,000 megawatt gap by 2030. A couple of these 3,000 megawatts are kind of one-offs, 850 megawatts of coal to gas conversions and 260 megawatts of hydro upgrades, and there's not going to be a lot more of those out there. So that's just high level, the picture that we're seeing with respect to the near-term gap. If you want to go to the next slide, I have a series of slides now that are intended just to kind of help you understand the nature of the problem so we can contextualize what solutions we think are going to be effective at meeting those, at meeting the challenge that we're facing. Go ahead and click. So we're seeing in our study that the most reliable and the most constraining events happen during wintertime, extended cold weather snaps, especially during low hydro years. Go ahead and click. So this is our heat map. I think it matches up pretty well with the one that we saw from WEC, which is, really any time of the day during December, January, and February is when we're seeing loss of load events. Go ahead and click again. And we're seeing many events that are very long in duration because they're related to low hydro conditions and extended cold snaps. So in our study, we're observing loss of load events. And this is on a tuned system, by the way. So this is a system that meets that 1 day and 10-year loss of load standard that Debbie had talked about. So even on a tuned system, and the events that we're seeing, most of them are short. If you look at the middle bottom chart with the gray bars, this is a histogram of loss of load events by duration. Most of them are a day, but we're seeing some up to 100 hours in duration. So much more like the Winter Storm Uri events than like the 1 hour that we had in California in 2020. On the bottom left-hand chart is just a scatter plot of all of the events that we saw with duration on the x-axis and size on the y-axis. So the worst one was like 2,000 megawatts for 100 hours. So that's a very significant event. And if you click again, that that really, to address these types of events, you really need a resource that can deliver energy over long periods of time. So short duration response is not going to be very effective at meeting these long duration energy limited events. If you go to the next slide, this one just kind of focuses on the role of hydro. So the Northwest is unique. We're winter peaking, and we've already heard a bit about that from NERC and WEC about how some resources are effective in the summertime, especially solar and batteries that aren't effective in the wintertime. But then B, the role of the hydro in the Northwest is very unique. And on the bottom right there, these are each of the hydro years that are in the hydro data set that BPA is using for planning. So they're using a 1989 through 2018 30-year set of water conditions as being representative of what they expect to see going forward. A lot of those years, we don't see any reliability events at all. So if it's a wet year, there's plenty of energy in the system. There's a lot of machine capability in the dams, and you can ramp those up and we're fine. There's some years that are in the middle where there's some risk, but then there's a few years where the risk is noticeably higher than the other ones. And if you are familiar with hydro conditions in the Northwest, these won't be a surprise to you. Randy Hardy always talks about 92 through 94 because he was in the BPA chair at that time. Steve Wright always talks about 2001 because that's when he was there. Oh yeah, 2010 and 1989 are the other ones that we're seeing. And so that's when we're seeing loss of load events in the Northwest, is when we don't have, because hydro is what, 60% of our energy, and it varies a lot from year to year. So if we're down, if you look on the left-hand chart, it's sorted by hydro budget. So 1993 had an average winter hydro budget of about 11,000 average megawatts. And in that year is when we see the most of the events in our simulations. So we're doing thousands and thousands of simulations where we're mixing up hydro years and load years and wind, solar outages, everything else. A lot of them happened in 1993 hydro conditions, and scattered around the other ones, the other dots are the other ones that you see on the right. Go to the next slide. This is what it looks like kind of over a 10-day period where each of the double humps is a day of load. And then you can see the colors are the different resource types. The thermal is along the bottom. You can see the hydro is ramping up and down to try to follow load. In this simulated event, we have actually a lot of wind and solar in the wintertime. This is the greater Northwest, so probably some of this is in Wyoming and Utah. But in this event, there's a 2,000 megawatt gap that we can't meet. There's not enough energy to meet it across the entire time period. And so there's just no energy for charging batteries, for example. Go to the next slide. I thought it might be helpful to do a little bit of a comparison to the Southwest. It's so different. And what we hear a lot of is, well, California is building all these batteries and solar, and the Southwest. And why wouldn't that be a good solution for the Northwest? So I thought I would just do a little bit of a quick comparison. This is what they're planning to build in California is on the left-hand chart there, and then the right-hand chart is Arizona, or the whole desert Southwest, including New Mexico, I should say. And it's tens of gigawatts of solar and batteries. And there's a reason for that, because those are really, really good resources in the desert. They have high capacity factors. They have a lot of flat land where you can build the stuff. And they just are really, really good for resource adequacy because it's a summertime event. It's hot during the day. It's a desert, so it cools off at night. So you have the solar to take care of you during the daytime, and you have the storage to get you through into the night, just like the charts that Debbie showed. And it's really, really effective if that's the primary problem that you're trying to solve. So if we go to the next slide. This is a different event. So Debbie showed the August of 2020 events. I like to focus on this September the 6th of 2022 event, because at least I watched this unfold in real time from my apartment in San Francisco. And I think the whole rest of the world did too, as CAISO went to EEA stage 3 and we're ready to pull the trigger on rotating blackouts. And Governor Newsom sent out the Amber Alert to everyone, the grid's about to crash, please turn off your lights. And right away, we got 1.5 gigawatts of response. It was instantaneous. And that really helped. We needed every megawatt of everything that we had to make it through that day. So the colors here are the different resources and what they were contributing. The critical hour was hour ending 7 p.m., hour ending 19. And what we've highlighted there is what each of the resources is doing during that hour. The solar is providing almost nothing because it was right after sundown. Now, it doesn't say doesn't have value because it helped us get through all the hours before sundown and even have maybe a little bit of extra energy to not run the gas quite as hard to make it more likely to still be around in the evening when we needed it. Gas was at its highest value. We needed every megawatt of gas that we had in California as well. So this is a demonstration, and we can't retire any gas yet in California as long as we have events like this to prepare for. We have hydro, which is flexing up. A lot of imports came from the Northwest, so thank you for that. So this is what an event looks like in California. And if you go to the next slide.
Arnie, if you don't mind just
yeah,
pausing on that very point, because it's been in my mind for a while. And first off, I do want to point out the value and power of demand response. You get a governor saying, please turn off your power. You can't do that all the time, but what you can do is incent that and pay people to do that all the time.
100%.
But that point aside, Debbie's other point was, or one of her other slides, many other points that she made, was the value of interregional transmission in these moments. And I think you just said it, right? Like in this moment, the value of transmission from the Northwest to serve California was very powerful and helped the grid stay on. If we were to increase that capacity, whether that be from California, from the desert Southwest, from anywhere else, are these problems mitigated, or these issues mitigated from a resource adequacy perspective?
Yeah, I think one way to look at your question is during events like these, are the interregional ties fully jammed? Are they fully subscribed or fully utilized? So there were 8 gigawatts of imports coming into California during that period. But the total intertie capability in California is more like 12 or 13 gigawatts. So at least in this instance, intertie capacity wasn't necessarily the limiting factor. Now, that's not to say that it might not be during another event. Certainly adding more capacity would be valuable. It's also quite expensive, so you'd want to make sure. And as the regions grow, we probably are going to outgrow the existing intertie capability. When that happens is something that you want to look at very carefully, just given the expense involved. But certainly that interregional cooperation is demonstrated here. And we already, as I said earlier, are assuming that some of that is the case in our study of the Northwest, because there is this diversity. If the Northwest has a winter peaking event, the Southwest is summer peaking, they do normally have some excess thermal capacity that they can ramp up and ship north to help us out during our issues up here. So I just wanted to flash forward to another event that happened almost exactly 2 years later. This is September the 5th of 2024, another September heat wave. And this is an event where there wasn't even an energy emergency alert at all. In fact, there wasn't even a flex alert on this day because huge amounts of batteries and solar had been added between September 22 and 24. I'm not sure, can you flip back and forth a little bit to help make it visually? I mean, I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but go back again then. It just was a lot more solar on that day in 2024 and a lot more batteries. So the purple batteries is really 6 gigawatts of battery discharge helped us get through that critical hour in that day. And we're discharging all the way almost out until midnight. And we have continued to add batteries. And since then, in fact, there are 17 gigawatts of batteries online in California today. Great resource, helps us a lot. You go to the next slide. Coming back to the Northwest, this is what that MLK Day event looked like in January of 2024. So this is our most recent reliability event here in the Pacific Northwest. And it just looks very, very different. Again, it's a multi-day event. It's during the wintertime. The hydro is flexing up as much as it can. January or 2024 was a low hydro year, and January was especially low. So that was a very close call. We also had another event, of course, which was the Jackson Prairie issue, which we're not showing on here or really even modeling. But just to again emphasize how different this type of event looks like and what that means for the solutions that work and are helpful in the Northwest. I just pulled out, this is totally cherry picked, so guilty as charged right up front, what wind was doing during those events. On the right-hand side, you see the Montana wind. So the green is wind in Montana. It went to 0 right on January 12th and 13th and stayed at 0 throughout the duration of the weekend when Seattle and Portland were setting their wintertime cold weather records. And that's unusual. It's more common for the cold front not to be that wide and for Montana wind to be blowing when Seattle and Portland are cold. But this is a notable event, and it's important to pay attention to it. On the left-hand side is wind in the Bonneville area. They've got about, I forget the number, 7,000 megawatts of wind. They were getting about 567 megawatts on average over the January 13th most critical day. And I totally cherry-picked this January 15th to 17th, 2 days where there was 8 megawatts on average over that whole period when it still was very cold in Seattle and Portland. There was still risk. So just a visual indication. This is non-scientific, right? This is anecdotal, and we don't do our planning on anecdotes. I want to emphasize that, but it's just to give you a sense, help you understand, what might happen. So if you go to the next slide. So this then I'll just go ahead and click through. This then all feeds into our scientific measurement of the effectiveness of those resources at meeting the conditions that we're seeing in our model. So I've shown you here now the ELCC values for common resources that are in utility IRPs, solar, at customer scale, utility scale, onshore wind, batteries, long duration batteries, and natural gas. And if you go to the next slide, or next one, solar and wind are not 0 in our model. They're 10 to 24% of nameplate. So Director Nguyen, you asked how many megawatts of those resources does it take to equal a megawatt of perfect capacity? So it's 4 to 10, roughly, and is depending on what and where. I would typically use a number like 7 just as a round number, but it does depend on the circumstances. If you click again, the 4-hour batteries are more like 3 to 9% diurnal batteries in the greater Northwest. And again, it's because the events that we're trying to solve with them are up to 100 hours in duration, and there's not enough energy to charge the batteries with. Now, this is very tricky. Batteries are new. And when we do these type of studies for almost anybody else, we find much higher values. And when we do studies for individual utilities in the Northwest, like Puget Sound Energy, when Portland does their studies, when Idaho Power does their studies, they find much higher values for batteries. So this is very, very tricky because it depends on really the Columbia River system and its, interannual variability and all the storage that's already tied up into the hydro system, right? Grand Coulee Dam, Dworshak, all of the flood control dams. There's a huge amount of storage already in our region. Storage does saturate, as Debbie mentioned. So our region is kind of saturated with storage. That doesn't mean that every utility in the region are themselves saturated with storage, and they don't necessarily have contractual, rights to go and access the storage that's on the Columbia. They have to access it through the market and through various other mediums. So it's a really hard challenge. But this is what we're seeing, is that for the broader region, the batteries are not very effective at helping meet those events.
And Arnie, would that be true? Debbie's slide on renewables, storage, and renewables plus storage was insightful to me.
Mhm.
These looks like you've assessed them sort of separately. I don't think it's just additive to say, okay, if I pair a 4-hour battery storage with utility solar, that means it's 16 plus 6%. It's probably some other number, but seems the point you're making right now on the saturation levels would still be the same point if I were pairing it with a renewable resource.
Yeah, it still would be true even in the Northwest, that adding them together would help some. But one thing I want to emphasize is that a lot of that diversity we're already getting with the way that the solar and wind interact with the hydro system. So if you look at the solar ELCC for utility scale solar, it's 16 to 18%. That's probably higher than what you might get if you were just pairing hourly matching solar production with the coldest events. But because we have the ability to use solar to hold water back in the dams, this looks a lot more like just kind of the average capacity factor of a normal winter day. So you're already getting some of that benefit because of the storage we already have in the region. And similar, it's a similar thing for wind, although wind also is a multi-day kind of cycle. Like wind tends to blow for multiple days and then not blow for multiple days. So it's a little bit less of that effect with the wind.
So Arnie, do you, and this is even more hypothetical, I think, than nuclear, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Tidal power. I noticed that Bonneville just signed a PPA for tidal power off I think the Oregon coast. And I know there've been studies in the Northwest, and some things tried and maybe didn't make it because of fish issues. And that is dispatchable. It's, the tide comes and goes, and waves come and go. I mean, what's the likelihood of that versus nuclear as the dispatchable coming on sooner rather than later? I know Energy Northwest is looking into that. Do you consider sort of hypothetically what could happen with those, even though they're more maybe 5-10 years out?
Yeah, so phase 2 of our study will look at solutions, and we certainly have nuclear, gas with carbon capture on our list. I don't have a good characterization of a tidal or a wave technology because it doesn't make it into our databases yet. It's even a little bit before that. Tidal would be as regular as the lunar cycle. And it would probably pair well with the hydro, because you could just use the tides to recharge the hydro. But I mean, anything that you're putting in the ocean is going to get beat up. So that would be the real challenge that I would see with it. But it's certainly, there's a bunch of things that need to be on our list of technologies to be investing in. If you go to the next slide, so the next one, yeah, just click one more time.
And Arnie, we are past time at this point,
Okay,
just so you know.
yeah. I'm getting close to being done. But just to, we did take a ELCC for natural gas, and that's at 93%. So that's kind of the 5% that Debbie talked about, plus the 3% for correlated outages during the wintertime. Just go ahead and click through. We did look at energy storage and flexible loads, and those can be helpful if the duration is matched to the event. So just like for our battery storage, not very helpful. Like a 6-hour demand response, not very helpful in the Northwest. If you can have a 3-day type of demand response program, that will be more valuable to help address these wintertime events. Go ahead and keep on going. And then one last sort of maybe a key point to focus on, which is that, Director Nguyen was referring to earlier, is that there are resources identified in all the IRPs that in theory are sufficient to meet the 9,000 megawatt resource gap. But it does take an awful lot of megawatts of these type of resources to get the effective megawatts. So this is 30,000 megawatts, maybe 40,000 megawatts of planned resources. So all that many interconnections, PPAs, site control, financing, all the machinery that you have to crank up to get a project built, you have to do it 5 to 7 times more if you're trying to meet a capacity problem with a wind and solar type of a resource. And so I don't want to say it's impossible to meet this level of growth, but it does require a 4 to 5x of our historical levels of resource development. So over the past 20 years, we've been maybe 1 to 2 gigawatts per year for the whole region, and we would need maybe 6 to 8 gigawatts per year between now and 2030 to get the 9 gigawatts of effective capacity that we need. And again, it's at a time when all these projects are very challenged because of all of the headwinds from federal policy, supply chains, costs, everything else. I can probably stop there. Yeah, so I'll note phase 2, we are looking at solutions, and so stay tuned for that.
We can probably take 1 or 2 more questions. I don't know if the bench has any or if we want to open it to the public and eat into break. Going once, going twice. Anyone from in the room? Okay. In that case, we do have a question in chat for you, Arnie, from Joel Nightingale, UTC staff. Around slide 11 or 12, which I'll screen share again in a moment, you mentioned that your analysis used a mix of different hydro, wind, solar load, et cetera, years from the past. For each given model run, was the modeling run internally consistent? In other words, is the assumed solar production from the same year as the assumed hydro production, et cetera? If not, can you explain the reasoning?
Yeah, I think I understand this. Let me try it and see if I'm answering the question. So, in these types of studies, we go to a lot of effort to make sure that we're weather matching on an hourly basis, electric load and solar and wind production. And that's because there are correlations and anti-correlations that are really important to capture. What we haven't done is tried to match a given year's wind production, so all 8760 hours of wind production in 1993 to hydro conditions in 1993. And our sense is because, or even load in 1993 to hydro conditions in 1993. And our sense is that those type of variations with electric load, temperatures, solar production, wind movement tend to be more short duration fluctuations. So atmospheric disturbances, systems that move through, and those can move through in any given year. So we haven't observed that it's important to try to match a hydro year with wind that actually occurred during that year. There certainly is interannual variability in wind, and we are capturing that. But in effect, we're assuming it's randomly correlated or uncorrelated with hydro conditions. It's probably not true in the strictest sense because there are El Nino and La Nina type of effects that might have full year impacts. But I think it's better than trying to restrict our data set to only use matched wind and hydro years.
Thank you very much. I assume you're sticking around.
Yeah, I'll be here.
Great, great. So we can always come back to questions and comments on that. We will now hand it over to, are we handing it over to our chair? Okay, to talk about an update on the data center working group launched by the Governor's Executive Order 2505. And give me a moment while I pull up those slides.
Thanks, Heather. I'll kind of take the lead on getting us through the build up here. And then we have a couple slides, one from the Department of Commerce and one from us at the UTC that we'll split up a little bit, but we'll work through this. We had a meeting of the work group earlier today, so this is really fresh for us. But if we go to the next slide. The setup here is, as you pointed out, Executive Order 2505. On February 4th of this year, the governor issued this executive order establishing this data center work group and directing the State Department of Revenue to lead that group. I pulled this quote out: "We must ensure Washington remains a leader in technology and sustainability." These experts will help us do that from the governor, because I think that really sums up the big issue here. The governor is saying we want to continue this leadership on both technology, which I think you can read as load growth at this point, and sustainability. And right now, it seems like those two things may feel very pitted against one another. In fact, a lot of this discussion seems to be centered around that. But I think the governor is recognizing that we must do everything we can to advance both those things at once, and that's what the focus of the work group has been so far. As noted here, it sets forth a group of experts from across government to investigate these issues. That includes the Department of Revenue, Commerce, us as the UTC, ecology, utilities, labor groups, environmental advocates, tribes, and industry, as well as there are 4 legislators that are participating in it that are non-voting members. We'll kind of get to the work group structure here in just a second. But the focus areas key to this discussion are energy consumption in the grid, obviously something we've been talking about the entirety of this discussion, tax revenue and incentives, job creation and economic development, and environmental sustainability and land use. And I think an important piece of all this is a lot of times those discussions get held in silos purposefully in many instances. And this is kind of bringing some of that together for us to look at what's the best policies and what are the best practices we're seeing from across the country. So very interesting to bring all those things together. Now, the governor set forth a lot of folks to join this work group, a lot of people, a lot of perspectives, and a lot of issues to bring it up, and a lot of flexibility on how we do that. But the one thing the governor did not give us flexibility in is the time in which we have to do it. The deadline being December 1st of this year, which on February 4th probably seemed like a really long ways away, but it's getting closer and closer as we go. We'll move to the next slide real quick. As I noted, the Department of Revenue is charged with putting this together and put together a full work group of 32 members, which Glenn and I are both a part of, representing Commerce and the UTC, and then the 4 non-voting legislators as well. 2 subgroups were created: the Energy and Resource Impacts subgroup, which Glenn co-chairs with Kate Bruns from the governor's office, as well as the Tax Revenue and Economic Development, which is chaired by the governor's office and the Department of Revenue. So those 2 subgroups kind of meet separately, go over issues separate to each of those, and develop findings and recommendations within their areas of expertise. And today we went through all of the findings and voted on those and are now working through the recommendations. Move to the next slide if you want. So just getting us up to date here on the timeline, as noted today, we had the full subgroup work meeting. We adopted findings across both areas of tax and energy and resources. And then each subgroup brought forth its recommendations. So each subgroup voted on a set of recommendations to bring out to the public for comment. And actually today we'll kick off a 2-week period of public comments on those draft recommendations. And I'll put a link at the end of our discussion here into the chat where people can go and make comments on those recommendations and see them. Next Friday, we have another energy and resources subgroup meeting. So that's the group that Glenn is leading with Kate Bruns. And then joint meetings on the 10th of October. And then today we announced that we're going to actually have another joint meeting on the 16th of October. So that did not make it into my timeline slide here. And then the full work group gets back together on October 24th, which is effectively the end of our meetings. And then we get to work on writing a report to the governor for the 1st of December. By the numbers, so this is the energy and resources work group, specifically the tax and revenue work group probably had some different ones, but ultimately 19 proposed findings. This is kind of the ground truthing of the current state. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, 19 passed today, or did 18 pass? I think we had one that was voted down.
Something like that.
Yeah, so 19 or 18 that actually passed through the full group. And then 12 proposed recommendations, and that number maybe it's sort of categorized of recommendations at this point in the 12 categories you see there: climate policy, emerging technology, water, air, transmission. Forecasting is a huge one and sort of a baseline. You hear a little bit more about that in a second. Load flexibility. There are some sub findings across each of those, so that 12 number probably misleads a little bit on the total number of recommendations. But then we have public comments coming in. Actually, the Department of Revenue today identified that the listserv that we have for this work group that people can sign up to get information about has about 3,500 members on the listserv. So we are expecting some good public comments. We've already actually gotten quite a few. So we'll see where that goes. Go to the next slide. I'll take from the UTC what sort of some of the major issues are that we've focused on from our perspective. First one is forecasting new data center loads. I spent some time over the weekend going out and trying to find a variety of different resources to say, what is the ground truth on this? What's going on? We've heard some from the Northwest Power Council predicting the potential to double average peak demand by 2046 from 22,000 average megawatts to 44,000. Almost a doubling of peak demand from 33,000 megawatts to 60,000 megawatts. From McKinsey, I saw they've predicted an increase from about 25 gigawatts of data center load today to over 80 gigawatts of demand in the US by 2030, which is not that far away, consuming about 12% of the US power by that point, by 2030. And NERC has its large load task force working on this, and Wood Mackenzie estimates that data center pipeline is exceeding 92 gigawatts by the end of 2024. By way of comparison, the CAISO market that Arnie just told us a lot about is about a 48 gigawatt peak. So we have in the pipeline for data center load 2 CAISOs approximately. And I've just thrown out a bunch of numbers. If that's confusing to everybody, it's confusing as heck to me. It's like, I just told you about apples. I just told you about oranges. I just told you about oatmeal. Like we're getting all these different versions of what the actual load forecast is. So it's very important and has been brought up many times in that group of the importance of getting these forecasts right, getting us to understand what's real, what's not duplicative, what we think is actually going to come online, what the actual factors of these data center workloads are going to be. I think it's an industry right now that's racing. I think it's important that we focus on that technology, but we also have to get it right so that we get resource adequacy and we don't overburden ratepayers with resources that we don't ultimately need. So that's one piece. Clean energy deployment. I think we've kind of had a little bit of a discussion on this here today, is just to make sure that this load growth is consistent with the state's climate and energy laws. And we've had a lot of focus on that. I think emerging federal policy is going to make that a more challenging thing for all of us. But again, it's an important piece to me is that we consider those things together. Rate impacts and fair share of costs has been front and center for the UTC. I know it has been for Commerce and others, is just to make sure that as we have new large loads join the system, that they are paying for the costs that they are causing. This is like basic fundamentals of how the UTC operates, is that cost causers should pay for the costs that they cause to the system. And I think really interesting for us is the flexibility opportunity here, as we just talked about a little bit with demand response and its ability to look like a resource. So far, this load has joined the grid as sort of an inflexible load. And this is an area where I think we as a state have the opportunity to really bring some leadership and bring some thought about how do we set up the policies and tariffs to make sure that we enable and incent flexibility of that load coming onto the system, both to interconnect it faster. I think we've actually had a lot of discussion that on the resource side lately here at the UTC of how can we look at rules more flexibly to get more generation on the system faster. Let's look at that same opportunity for loads and look at how we can incent that behavior amongst data centers. So I'll turn it over to Glenn for the next slide for the commerce perspective.
Thank you. And while we do have 2 slides, I'm not sure there really are 2 perspectives here. I just let the UTC pick the first 4, and then I got to pick the second 4 because I like all 4 of theirs as well. So the additional priorities that I want to talk about here, the first one has to do with the impacts of large new loads on the hydro resources and fish populations on our state. We've had discussions in the work group extensively about how the stress that we could see to the power system if we add loads and don't keep up with that in terms of adding resources, that is going to stress the river systems and the fishery resources on the system to the point even where the fish protection measures could be suspended in order to what we might normally think of as keep the lights on, but in this case, it's keep the data processing on. And then the second one is maybe a variation on the this question about adding resources, but making sure that we have adequate resources, which could be a combination of supply and demand flexibility to maintain reliability. And then the third one for us is that we have the resources to enable us to develop our economy. We have a lot of businesses that would like to locate in Washington or already here and would like to expand. And the constraint of not having adequate supplies of electricity, I mean, it really bites when we're talking about jobs and tax revenues and things like that. And then finally, we are interested in opportunities to leverage the capabilities of the tech sector, not just to meet their own requirements for electricity, but to help the state build a stronger transmission system, to invest in innovative new technologies that maybe are a little too risky for utility customers to bear that risk today. But if we have Amazon and Microsoft investing in those, that could really pay off for us too. So we're really looking for opportunities to partner with the tech sector to try to build a stronger power system overall to serve both them and the existing customers in our state. Thank you.
And now I'm realizing I should have taken that last one and put it on the UTC slide on the opportunity to leverage, but I'm just kidding. I think
got it.
at the end of the day, they're both important. All 8 of those
that's-
concepts are complementary of one another, and I think important to both of us, but just different focus areas. But why don't we open it up to questions at that point?
Actually, we have a break on the schedule now, and our 20-minute Q&A period will be after NIA and Tacoma PUD present, because we would like to hear these issues in tandem with load flexibility. So I see that there are some questions in chat as well. One of them is for you, Arnie, if you wouldn't mind responding, because that was about a previous presentation. And then other questions related to data centers we will take after our presenters on load flexibility, which will be after break. So the time is 3:25. Let's be on break till 3:40. Let's come back a little early, and then we can maybe leave a little early today. Wanted to juxtapose this update on data centers and whether or not they can be flexible with a conversation on flexible load. Excited to have Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance here and Tacoma Public Utility District. And I will hand it to Nia.
Thank you so much. We'll get started. My name is Brenda Hunt. I'm the principal of Load Flex at NIA. I'm going to invite Jeff and Almaz to introduce themselves, and then we'll get going on our presentation.
Hi, I'm
Okay.
Jeff Harris. Oh, sorry, Almaz. Go ahead.
That's all right. And I'm Almaz Negash with Tacoma Power.
And I'm Jeff Harris with the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. I'm Chief Transformation Officer there.
We'll go to the next slide. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by load flexibility, how that, we'll hand it over to Almaz to talk about how it's supported as load flexibility, and then bounce back to us to talk a little bit about what NIA and 10 utilities in the Northwest are doing to develop this as a resource. Next slide. So starting with just a shared definition here, when we say load flexibility, we mean to include things like demand response or demand flexibility. And what we want to make sure is we think about it as a resource that can be deployed 24/7, and also make sure that we limit the impact to customers and maximize the economic and reliability values for utilities. Next slide. So we've kind of set up, with the help of the Alliance, the 10 utilities we're working with, defining 8 load flexibility value streams. And you'll notice that the topic of today, meeting resource adequacy requirements, is definitely on that list. But we also know that if we only think about demand response events or kind of those hottest or coldest days, that we'll miss the opportunity to capture additional value. So we want to make sure that as this resource is developed, and especially thinking about hydro as 50 to 60% of our capacity in the region, how do we make sure that even on those great water years that we're getting value out of this, so that this can win in IRPs and ultimately continue to deliver a affordable and reliable resource for all customers. So I'll pass it over to Almaz.
Thank you. So I think the previous presenters did a really good job presenting like the role of demand response in supporting resource adequacy. So keeping things at a really high level. And I'm going to tell you some of the criteria that make load flexibility ideal for Tacoma, for pretty much any utility, actually. And then some of the challenges that we've had in like sort of getting all of these criteria to simultaneously come together as we pursue demand response, and as we have pursued it for the past 20 years, believe it or not. So those 3 conditions basically are technical feasibility, economic viability, and customer willingness. And what I mean by technical feasibility is that it has to be there when you call on it. So we've had some times in the past when we offered a special rate to a customer, for example, so a curtailable rate, so that they can be curtailed in the event of emergency, and then when the time comes, they're just not available. And so that sort of shakes the credibility of these programs. So they really need to be able to be there when called on. So that's one aspect. There's the economic viability, and for that, like in terms of economic viability, there's the customer value proposition, there's a utility value proposition, and it has to make economic sense for everybody. Everybody has to get something out of this this solution. And of course, last is the customer willingness. So how do your customers feel about load flexibility? Or how have you explained it to them? If they're seeing, as a good friend of mine likes to tell me all the time, that program that utilities, where they pay you $5 to turn off your air conditioner on the hottest day of the year, you're probably not going to have a lot of customer willingness. So like how it's actually presented to customers in a way that it's feasible for them or acceptable to the customer as well. So those are the sort of the 3 criteria that we need to all come together in order for us to have a successful demand response program. This is high level. There are a lot more technical details, especially in the technical feasibility part, but this is just basic high level criteria. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll tell you some of the challenges that we've had. So our IRP actually has identified 2 to 10 megawatts of load flexibility as a cost-effective resource adequacy option. So we are modeling it in our IRP. And as we model it, it is viable, and it is a resource that we can that we hope that we can rely on. But as we try to procure that resource, we've had some challenges. And in terms of the technical challenges, so in this list, the first 3 are with the residential program, and the other one is with an industrial program. But we had a few years back a residential water heater program that you know, we don't call it a disappointment, we call it a learning opportunity. But one of the first problems that we had to do with the technology itself. It had a lot of failures. So being able to assess which technologies you're going to use was, you know, an initial hurdle that we had to overcome. But then just the basic things like baseline estimates and performing, forecasting what the performance of the demand reduction is going to be. We actually found that we did not get as much load reduction that we had expected. We had been relying on like literature reviews for how much we could expect, but you know, how much you actually get from your customers may vary, you know, and so that was something that we found out. And of course, there's the snapback effect after the post-event surge in demand afterwards had to be managed. And so those were some of the technical challenges that we had just with that small residential hot water heater program. But then even with some of our industrial, we had a very promising industrial demand response program. And we've also had large customers that come to us and want a favorable rate. And so they offered to provide demand or load flexibility. And so we start the conversation with these customers and talking about like, okay, what are your constraints? How can we actually use you? And then when we finally get into it, the operational constraints of that particular load are just too constrained that it's not useful for the demand response program anymore, or for resource adequacy, because, you know, again, that first thing, it has to be there when you need it. It's not an economic program where if it's there, great. And if it's not, also great. It really needs to be there when necessary. So those were some of the technical challenges that we had. The biggest economic challenge is that the rates are just low. And so it can be hard sometimes to make it worth it for especially our non-industrial customers. And then we've even struggled to get, we've had some really innovative ideas around our larger industrial customers, but haven't been able to get funding to sort of de-risk that. And then, of course, for customer willingness, again, I said we have large customers that come to us often and are eager to participate, but the technical challenges get in the way sometimes. And as far as our residential customers, a lot of times they can be a little less easy to attract into the programs. And so these are just some of the challenges that Tacoma Power has come across. And I'm not joking when I say 20 years that we've been at trying to acquire demand response programs or load flexibility programs, but we get closer and closer every year. So it's going to happen eventually. It's in our IRP, and so we're hoping to see that soon. And I think I am done with my slide.
Thanks, Almaz. Almaz highlighted some of the challenges that one utility faces as they're trying to grow a load flexibility resource. And I forgot to mention in my introduction that for several years, I managed the team that delivered Portland General Electric's load flexibility portfolio. So I could tell you from experience, she is not alone. And about 10 utilities actually recognized that these challenges existed back in 2023. And they joined together and formed up the End-Use Load Flex special project with NEA. And this alliance represents such a great range of perspectives. You'll notice in that list of logos, we have all of the large IOUs in Oregon and Washington, all the way down to one of the smallest municipal utilities. So with those experiences, we've been able to work, got a whole list of things that the Alliance has accomplished in the last 20 months. I won't go through them exhaustively, but what we really do appreciate is that utilities have come to the table, shared their challenges, shared their learnings to the benefit of each other over the last, just in the 20 months we've been together. The team has also identified of the grid values, which ones are prioritized. So as we evolve products and services to meet those needs, we can make sure we've got high priority grid values incorporated into that work. And last but not least is that even over that short time frame, we've also been able to get some field studies in place to really start to understand how market transformation might benefit the growth of this resource. So kudos to these 10 utilities and the folks we've been working with. They've been with us month in and month out doing a lot of hard work. I think kind of the biggest culmination of this work has been the development of a 2026 to 2029 strategic and business plan to define a portfolio going forward. But before we go into the details of that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Brenda. I think one of the first questions is like, why NIA? Why were we involved in this? And there's a couple of answers to that. Oh, sorry. One is NIA's strategic and business plan that we just launched for the current 5-year period of 2025 through 2029. It was just approved last year, just signed the last contract this month, actually. So, and one of the new elements of that strategic plan was a new strategic goal around accelerating the adoption of end-use technologies that could participate in load flexibility. And the rationale for that is that NIA's core work in energy efficiency over the last 28 years, as you see here on the screen, has built a very large resource using the scaling that's available from leveraging natural market forces. And so we're all about trying to figure out what it is that's inhibiting the natural market from adopting technology, and also finding what are those things about the innovative technologies we're working on, what is it that the market loves about that, and how can we leverage that to accelerate market adoption. So the premise here is that we can use that same approach that we've used for all these years for energy efficiency and built a gigawatt scale energy resource, that we could do that with load flexibility as well. And there's another component of that assumption, and that has to do with the synergies that we see with energy efficiency technologies. A lot of the things we're working on in energy efficiency are energy efficient because they incorporate variable speed technology, for example, and they incorporate better controls, and they incorporate communication technologies. These are things that the market is already integrating into their products and services. And that will deliver efficiency, but we can also leverage those to do load flexibility at the same time for a fairly marginal incremental cost. So in some cases, it's just software. All the hardware is there. We just need to be able to talk to this device and give it a utility request, and it knows what to do through software. So that's sort of the vision that we're working on here. And if you go to the next slide, Heather, thank you. This looks somewhat familiar to the previous graph. We have done an independent assessment of just a couple of end uses, space and water heating in residential, space conditioning in commercial buildings of certain types, and done a forecast of if we could achieve a certain amount of market adoption rate, and if we could get participation at a certain rate, how big of a resource could we build? And our planning estimate is that we could build a resource that's 1 to 3 gigawatts at the end of 20 years, just focusing on those end uses. And that's 1 to 3 gigawatts is differentiated by the season. So 3 gigawatts would be a summertime peak number, 1 gigawatt would be a spring fall, and something in the middle, it would be a wintertime estimate for those resources. So we went through that exercise just to say, like, could this be important enough for the region to actually get together and fund? And the answer, we believe, is yes. The potential is there. And so our role, our job, is to help the region figure out what can we do to scale quickly to realize that full potential. That's what we're about and why we're involved. And I think I just want to elaborate one bit on what Brenda was saying, that those 8 value streams are necessary for us to build a platform of end-use devices so that utilities who are in different places around the region and able to take advantage of different types of value streams can afford to help to participate in building this platform. Not every utility is in the same place in terms of which of those value streams they can capture, but almost every one of them has a distribution system. And so if you could capture some value on the distribution system, you might be able to pay for this And if we can pay for it through those value streams, then when it comes time to call the big event that happened in California a couple of years ago, where the governor had to say, it's time to get off the grid, we would already have this infrastructure built out and paid for by these other value streams. So that's part of the vision we're trying to pursue here. So now I'm going to turn it back to Brenda to talk about how we envision that we're going to get this done.
So we've got 6 key focus areas for the 4-year portfolio. And I do want to reiterate, these were developed very much with the participation of the 10 utilities participating in this project. Many of you may see those are familiar themes from the day in terms of, making sure we make the business case every year for load flexibility. And so that we are ready in those low water years to achieve the vision. Making sure to increase product availability. So making sure that things that people are already buying are ready to be connected to the grid. And then making sure that they're connectable in a open standard so that utilities can forecast what load is available to flex and that when they call upon it, it will be there. We look at valuing and measuring this resource. So every utility does have a way of valuing, measuring this resource. We want to support those efforts, help utilities standardize where it's applicable. And then just making sure that this is all done with the idea of scaling as rapidly as possible. So scalable solutions. I think that's about everything I had to say on this slide. But if you take one thing away from our conversation today, we would love for you to think about the next slide, which is the value that we've already seen by coming together, each utility doing it on their own versus utilities coming together, other stakeholders in the region to help each other solve these problems. Anything you wanted to add, Jeff?
I just want to thank the 10 utilities who have been participating. It's been very helpful for us trying to help the region understand what's possible, as well as just there's been a lot of learning that's happened in this collaboration already. Utilities learning from each other. This is an emerging space for the Northwest, and I really appreciate Arnie's representation of how different the Northwest is from the Southwest, where peak load is driven by space cooling. We have some very unique attributes in the Northwest that we can learn from each other as we develop this resource.
So any questions? And
Yeah, thank you very much for getting our conversation started. Hopefully we have quite a few questions now. We actually have more than 20 minutes. We had 20 minutes for questions about this presentation as well as the data center work group. And we will start with our bench here.
So Almaz, I just want to say thank you. I am a Tacoma Power customer, and I appreciate that you've been at this for 20 years trying to make this happen. And I'm excited that Tacoma is a part of this coalition and that NEA is taking this on. So I guess the question is, so you have this business plan. Is this now does this have to be approved by the NEA members to go forward, or has it already been approved?
We are in the middle of trying to land on the right mix of activities in the plan and a budget for that. And then that will go forward to the NEA's board of directors. We're hoping that we can do that within a month or so, or at least at the December board meeting for approval. So we're right now trying to find that sweet spot between what we would all like to do versus what we can afford.
Right. And then the end result, each of the utilities will have some, if it goes forward, that each of the utilities will have some budget, in a sense, some project that they'll be focused on to achieve, to contribute to the whole.
Yeah, each utility will have a share of the funding, just like we do with our energy efficiency work. It'll be shared out. And then the demonstration projects or other activities that we take will be spread across the region. So there will hopefully be projects in each individual utility if we're doing, let's say, field studies. Some of the research projects would just, all the participants would benefit from those research projects regardless of where they are. So the value will be spread across all the participating utilities that way.
Great. Well, thank you. And I look forward to hearing what happens in Tacoma.
Happy to.
Having just purchased a heat pump water heater
Oh.
to replace my gas water heater.
So if we're going to tell personal stories, this is not my question, but I just can't help myself. I was in North Carolina last week, and my son showed me his new heat pump water heater in the basement, and it had a CTA 2045 sticker on it, you know. And I thought, I told him, I said, you know, in 2019, the Washington State Legislature kicked that off, and I don't think that sticker would be on your water heater, and that port probably wouldn't be on your water heater either if the state of Washington hadn't started the ball rolling 6 years ago. So, but anyway, the question that I have, and I have to say, he was not that interested in that story. But anyway, my question, and maybe this is for Almaz, I don't know, but maybe any of you, and that is, what do you see as the appropriate role for the Bonneville Power Administration in this effort to develop demand response resources? I looked at your list of 10, and they are utilities that are responsible for their own resource adequacy requirements. They, you know, face market prices for electricity, and they serve what, maybe half the customers in the region. What, and yet Bonneville, you know, they don't have retail customers, and yet they seem to me to be really key to successful implementation of demand response. Should we think of them as like a follower, and once these individual utilities figure it out, then maybe Bonneville can deliver it to the rest of the region, or should we be trying to get them at the table today?
Almaz, you want to answer that, right?
And so I will just say I'm always a fan of bringing people to the table. So if one of the options was to bring Bonneville to the table, then by all means bringing Bonneville to the table. But I just choose not to speak on behalf of other entities. But I'm for bringing Bonneville to the table.
I think, Glenn, you've already mentioned that the biggest challenge is that Bonneville's not a retail utility. They're a wholesaler, and these conversations about load flexibility happen with the end customer, you know, and the utility that's the retail utility. So that creates a challenge for Bonneville. One way that conversation can be facilitated is through rate structures. Now, I've been around here long enough to know I'm not about to talk to you about rate structures or Bonneville, but I will say that we have some participants in our group of 10 that are Bonneville customers with different contracts with Bonneville. And we've been facilitating a conversation amongst those in the public power family about what they might say to Bonneville. So that's one of the values of having the collaboration. This is a hard nut to crack, I'll just say that. But we're here to help the region figure it out.
Thank you.
Do we have any outstanding questions on Zoom chat that we would like to bring into this space? Nothing from Austin or Peyton. I'm going to assume no. folks in the room, any questions on data centers, please join us at one of the chairs here. And yeah, if you can hand down a mic, great.
So this is actually just a follow-up on Glenn's question / comment. And I work with public utility districts in Washington State. Approximately half are what they call full requirements customers of BPA. And because of that, they have a contract that basically BPA provides all the balancing services. And until and unless there is some price signal from Bonneville to the utilities, there is absolutely no reason for the utility to engage in this. In fact, they wouldn't even know when to ask their customers to cut back, or perhaps say, hey, now's a, there's lots of energy, you can use a little bit more, it doesn't matter. So that, to me, that's the question. And part of the thing to think about is there's been a new contract that's been negotiated and between the utilities, and BPA, and that contract is going to go through, I believe, 2045. So I don't know what the window is to effective change, but it would be very difficult for my members who are full requirements customers to participate, not because they don't want to. In fact, I think many of them think it's a good idea conceptually. It's just they don't have any ability to know how to participate in a way that's helpful.
Could you say your name for the record before you step down? Thank you.
Sorry about that. Nicholas Garcia with the Washington Public Utility District Association.
Maybe I'll take the mic for a question. I guess I'd start with Almaz. I'm assuming that Tacoma, I'm sorry, but I'm not good at consumer and utilities, is not a full requirements BPA customer. That's sort of question one. But can you also speak to other reasons why it might be that for Tacoma, their load flexibility keeps showing up in your IRPs, and maybe for others, that's not the case? Like, what do you think it is about Tacoma's circumstance that make that the case?
So you're right. We are not a full requirements customer. And what else? So a lot of what drives the resource that comes out of the IRP is the assumptions that you make about the resource. So part of it could be just the assumptions. We actually had a large customer in our service area that was very interested in providing demand response. So like the number that you see is an actual real number from a customer that had an interest in participating with us. And so we were able to put in an actual real number that we that came from one of our customers. So that's one of the reasons why demand response came out of ours, because it was the assumption that went in. It just happened to be a really good deal with one of our customers that we were going to be able to make happen. But again, going back to that challenge that I spoke to, sometimes when you start off and you think that this is going to work out, but when you start to get into the nitty gritty of the operation constraints of how you can actually use that resource, when you start to model it, it's not as beneficial as you might have thought initially. But for us, that was the case. Why it keeps coming up is because we have a customer that's willing to participate. We just haven't been able to get it to work operationally.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from folks on this topic, the last two topics?
Heather, I'll just join in. Nicholas. You raise a point. No, it's not a question for you. It's your comment made me think about merging up these two issues, which is the data center issue and this issue. And it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but what we've learned through that process is kind of similar to what you brought up on a full requirements customer, where it's like they go, and in this case, a data center goes to the utility and says, I want X amount of megawatts of interconnection. And they're like, okay, here, let's work out this agreement. Here's your interconnection agreement. Here you go. And then it's months later that the demand response team from that utility comes to the data center and says, hey, we've got this great product for you. It's called demand response. We can save you some money. That's not the point of negotiation for that. It is at the point of interconnection, I want 60 megawatts, which probably is as large as some full requirements customers of BPA. But when that discussion gets to be, well, actually, we can't interconnect you, but if you're flexible, we could interconnect you. That's the point when that discussion needs to merge in. And that's when I go back to our slides and say, is this the opportunity that we have, is trying to merge up that discussion into an interconnection discussion rather than here's this great product that can save you some money discussion. That I think is what we need to have happen on the data center side. I think this is a very different discussion for customers who are doing water pump or heat pump water heaters and other products. But it's interesting that the two kind of manifest themselves in similar ways.
I'm glad you brought that up, Chair, because that was going to be my last question. There's fancy stuff coming out of Duke about data center flexibility. And I think one of the authors is famous for saying we need to stop thinking about heat pump water heaters and start thinking about changing interconnection, changing transmission queues. And then there were a bunch of people who were like, hold on, we don't want to stop talking about smart thermostats. We think it's important not to. Do you know of any, and I suppose this might come up for others in the room, but are there conversations in the Northwest about changing interconnection, transmission queues, or even about the products and services in this project being relevant for or targeted toward the huge load that we're expecting?
Okay. We are working to find the common ground across these 10 utilities. And while all of them would say that data centers are going to have a significant impact on them one way or the other, they've not found an opportunity for us, NEA, to be able to help them with that. All the things you mentioned are the purview of other entities that are more suited for it. That said, we have looked at just the technologies involved from a traditional standpoint of energy efficiency, the heating and cooling technologies, for example. And data centers are pretty efficient at this point. But we have also noted that many of these are going to come in to the region with 100% backup generation. So what could that be as a contribution from it's kind of a distributed generation standpoint, maybe not load flexibility, but if those generators are not being used for backup at any given point in time, could they be used as a distributed generation resource? So Portland General Electric has a distributed generation program for backup generators that they've exercised for years successfully. And it's actually a win-win for the host sites because PG maintains those generators essentially. They make sure that they run them so that they're available and all that sort of thing. And so those people have those backup generators ready to go at any moment because PGE wants to be able to access them. So it's kind of a win-win from a customer side and a utility side. So that model could be deployed for large-scale data centers to help out during a peak load moment if they weren't needing those generators.
I feel like there's like a little bit of a part B to that question, which is, do we flex water heaters or no? And so I think it is worth addressing that because, thinking across the utilities in the Northwest, some of them have very high percentages of their load coming from very small resources, right? Like half their customers are residential. That might not necessarily mean half their load. But I think when we look at the challenges over the next year, 10 years, 20 years, it's going to take engaging every single customer that can participate. So it's important to develop that resource kind of at all levels.
And I'll just add from my perspective, I think it's a both and, because they're different things you're trying to solve, and it's different entities that are trying to solve them. Like, I don't think we should be using the NIA resources to go find data centers to help out, right? I think they have the resources that they have in order to solve that. If they had the right incentives in place, they'd figure out how to solve that. That, to me, the flip side of that is finding and aggregating the incentives for residential customers to give them the benefits and to give the utility the benefits. That's a different problem. That's a different group of stakeholders. So I think it's a both and. And I'll talk to Tyler when I see him next time to tell him that.
Nicholas Garcia again with Waputa. One of the things that we have thought about, my members have been thinking about, is quite frankly the use of the backup generation at data centers. And quite frankly, the challenge is the air pollution permits and those sorts of things. So this is not just an issue of making sure that you can have enough resources, but can you actually operate those resources consistently with whatever air pollution permits you have, which actually leads to another issue. As I understand it, the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, in doing their next power plan, is assuming that because natural gas is so limited and pipeline capacity is so limited, that some of the new or existing peaker plants are going to need diesel backup, diesel fuel backup. And again, that it will require a different level of air pollution permits, because diesel is a very different level of emissions, a type of emissions, than natural gas does. And quite frankly, don't know this, so I want to be clear about that, but I worry that they're relying on the installation of these tanks for diesel and whether or not they'll be able to get the permits to either install the diesel tanks or to operate the plants with the diesel. So I think that there's some risks here that we need to think about, how that interplays with the ability to keep the grid on.
Last chance for questions, particularly from Zoom folks. Haven't seen any hands yet, so I just want to double check. Okay. Thank you very much for that last panel. And now we are going to end our conversation with a chance for public comment. Give me a moment while I give folks a reminder on how that will work. So if you'd like to raise your hand, there's a raise hand feature within the reactions bar to sort of get in the queue. That's if you're on Zoom. If you're on the phone, *9 if you'd like to raise your hand and to lower it, and *6 to mute, unmute. And please do identify yourself when you speak. And if you're in the room, you're welcome to jump in the queue by coming to one of the chairs that's available. There's someone on Zoom? Okay. Austin and Peyton, if you can give me a clue on that, that would be helpful, because I can't actually see that when I'm screen sharing. Fred Hewitt from Northwest Energy Coalition, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. Fred Hewitt with the Northwest Energy Coalition, located in Portland. Hope it's okay for me to make a comment. Actually, I really appreciated the presentations this afternoon. Very thorough, very wide ranging, and especially appreciated the presentation from Debbie Liu. I always learn from her, even though I follow our resource adequacy pretty closely. And among other things, I'm a member of the Western Resource Adequacy Program Review Committee. So anyway, so I'd like to make 5 very quick comments on points that were raised across the afternoon here. First, to respond to a point that Commissioner Rendall made, just to point out that in terms of actions that are happening now to kind of speed things up for resource adequacy. Let me point to the BPA Grid Access Transformation, or GAT process, which is kind of in flight right now, and I think will actually provide a way to speed up the transmission interconnection queue and get kind of queue ready projects that are ready to connect up by sometime next year to move forward and start connecting to the grid. These are projects where they're basically ready to go. They know their points of receipt and delivery. They can pass the readiness criteria. A lot of the details are still being worked out, but this is a very positive development, given that Bonneville really kind of got overloaded by the amount of new requests to get online. And this is at least the interim step. And by the way, those new that onboarding process will provide what they're now calling interim service, basically a form of conditional firm service that will be firmed up, in the next 5 or 6 years, so they say. This will help a lot to, in the short run, to bring new resources onto the Northwest system that can provide directly assistance directly with resource adequacy. The other thing I want to point to is an initiative the California ISO is doing right now with regard to the Western Energy Imbalance Market and the forthcoming extended day ahead market, EDAM, that will actually be up and running next year. An initiative called the DDEMI, Demand and Distributed Energy Market Integration, which is basically a way of providing a more, I think the idea is to provide a more automated way for flexible demand resources, load flexibility to get into the market without, a pretty much a automated approach to doing that. With the advent of the new Western markets, I think market design is going to become an increasingly important issue for onboarding flexible resources and providing them with a, full compensation when they show up and when they perform. That'll be very beneficial as well. I want to mention, in terms of new resources we should be looking at for providing very high resource adequacy value, we should be looking at geothermal. I won't go into any detail here, but it's readily evident that geothermal is ready for a big breakthrough in the West, going to become a lot more available with the new enhanced geothermal drilling techniques. And that is something I think within the next decade, not overnight, but by the early 2030s, I think we will see quite a bit of that development. And there appears to be some potential for doing it west of the Cascades, because the new enhanced geothermal techniques allow going into rocks that basically, you couldn't access for the more traditional hydrothermal type of geothermal. So this is a very important development for resource adequacy, because geothermal can run effectively 90% of the time. And it appears can also be operated in both daily and seasonal flexibility modes. So just to highlight that, something coming forward. I really appreciated the update again from NEA. Been talking to them for a while about the initiative they're doing on flexible demand. And one comment that I would make, being a Portland General Electric customer, is PGE has a flexible load plan. We think, Northwest Energy Coalition thinks, all utilities should be, that are doing something significant on demand response flexible load ought to do those similar plans. In addition to the utilities that are already in the NEA project, it's really important for each utility to have its own roadmap. It's quite a complicated thing to do, of course. And as Almaz Nagash mentioned, with Tacoma having quite a bit of experience in this, it's a big lift, but it's also a very big potential value. But you have to have some sense of how it's going to all work together. Fourth point, and then I'll have one more after that, on BPA and public power. We think there is a lot of potential for flexible load in public power. Of course, some utilities are having a lot of their own load growth with data center load and other things. Just talking to staff from Forest Grove and Municipal here in Oregon, they have a data center coming online with 100 megawatts of load over the next several years, coming on in stages. I think Forest Grove's total resource use right now is about 40 megawatts. But they and the other utilities in public power that have very rapid load growth are kind of, a separate group. But for the full requirements customers and for many of the other block and slice customers with somewhat less load growth, they too have a lot of demand response potential. Can we think about aggregating that in some fashion and offering it to the investor owners who really need a lot more load flexibility and, figure out how to make it work either via Bonneville, in which case that would help reduce public power's net revenue requirements because Bonneville already sells surplus power, which can reduce that requirement. Why can't, some arrangement be made to sell flexible load, or for public power to band together and do it themselves? So just to point out, we see some real possibilities there. It's complicated to do, but the value is it's going to be very high. And finally, I just want to say on the data center flexibility issue, this is kind of like the biggest parlor game going around the country right now. We're sure that data centers can offer flexibility, but how much and under what conditions? I think Washington State and Oregon both have a really big opportunity to lead the way on that and to move forward on really finding that flexibility. Because like it or not, the data centers are soaking up what remaining headroom we have in the system for resource adequacy. So it would be beneficial to everybody if we can find a way to tap into the that they may be able to offer, realizing it's a very complicated story. So thanks for the time.
Thank you, Fred. I also can barely read an exchange in the chat that I think is valuable. There was a question about the phase 2 of E3's Northwest Utility Resource Adequacy Study. When will it be available? And I will say when it is available, we will put it on the website that we've kept sharing over the last 3 hours. So you won't have to look for it. We will make sure everyone gets it. Other public comment. Brian, I see your hand and we'll come to you next. We have someone in the room we'll go with first.
Press the button at the bottom and hold it down.
There we go. Hi again. Tim Sheldon. I live in Potlatch out on Hood Canal. I'm involved with Energy Northwest, but I just want to make a comment. As a former elected official, you can't resist sometimes, but my mom was born in the logging camps in the Olympics in 1916. And what they had for power was kerosene. And in the morning, the next day, they had to clean the globes. So they were ready to go for the next evening. The schoolhouse was basically a bunkhouse, and the teacher lived in one half and the classroom was in the other half. So later in about 1922, they moved down to Potlatch, which was just south of Hoodsport, and that was the logging camp for Phoenix Logging Company. And the power was the Delco. And the barge came in with the diesel fuel that was pumped into the tank, and power was provided until 10 o'clock when it all went off. But then she went to the University of Washington. She had to take the boat. She had to get over to Union, and then the boat went up to Port Townsend, where she changed boats overnight and then got to the university, the Coleman Dock and the University of Washington the next day. So the long and the short of that is we've changed so much so fast. And I think every politician or every elected official should be really aware of this adequacy issue. People take their electricity for granted. That's the way it is. And we will all be very surprised if we have rolling blackouts, but we need to see that danger coming. And we also seem to ignore what the cost is going to be. I know Seattle City Light listened the other day to the manager, their GM, talk about 9% increases, 9.5% increases for each year for the next 3 years, I think. That's a tremendous increase, but they can spread it over a wide base. smaller utilities can't spread that. So you've got quite a challenge here, and I really appreciate everybody working hard on these issues. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, the reason why we have these meetings is due to the former senator. It's his bill that created this this process. So we thank you for that.
Let's go to Brian on Zoom.
Hi, Brian Grunkemeyer with Flex Energy. I'm very excited to hear about the proposals to continue forward with demand flexibility, and I think that virtual power plants are going to be a big part of the future here. But Fred's comment on data center load flexibility harkened back to something that I did previously. I used to work for a local tech company here in Redmond, and my job was to run compute services on 300,000 machines. I actually pitched the idea of doing data center demand flexibility or demand response long ago, and the answer I got back was the value of the data was 100 times the value of the electricity. Now, that was just a knee-jerk reaction. I think there may still be opportunities there for some amount of data center flexibility, but my feeling is that's probably going to be around 7% of capacity, maybe 10% of capacity at most. And yet, that's significant, and it may be enough to help keep the lights on and integrate data centers much more quickly into the grid. But I'd encourage you to think about it in those sorts of mindsets. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Brian, thank you. And if you're interested, you can go look at the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI's DC Flex initiative and what they're doing and working with a number of entities and looking at flexibility of data centers.
Other public comments?
Apologize, I can't resist. Nicholas Garcia with Wapuda. Just two final comments to think about. The first is, remember that the people who are operating the grid, and especially the traders, are all human. And one concern that I have is that if resource supply becomes really constrained, often they are going to trade less often. They're going to hoard their power. And we all remember during COVID what happened to toilet paper. Whether or not there was a real shortage or not, there was a shortage because people stopped trading. And I worry that trading is going to become less common if people are worried that they're not going to be able to meet their load on their own BA, their own balancing authority. So that's just something to keep in mind, that undermining or underlying all this is human behavior. The second thing I want to mention, and it's dovetail on something that Mr. Olson said in his presentation, and I hope I got it right, so if I didn't, please correct me. But I think what you said is that it's one of the things that can make solar or perhaps wind have a higher capacity factor is the fact that it can be backed up by flexible hydro. And one of the challenges with that is that oftentimes the owner of the wind or solar is not the owner of the hydro. They could be two different entities far apart. And one way to address that is through energy marketers who basically aggregate resources. The challenge with that is that if I'm a owner of let's say a hydro facility, and I sell the output of that hydro facility to a marketer, and then they sell me back power that's mixed in with all the other power, I get a hit on the fact that it looks dirtier. And yet, by doing this, I'm helping the grid be more reliable, and I'm helping that marketer not have to balance that resource with natural gas resources. So we see this as a really good thing, but it has been criticized that utilities are basically trading, the PUDs in certain instances are trading in their clean power for less clean power just for money. And I'll be the first to admit it, they make money when they do this. This is something that's valuable to them, but it also is valuable to the region. And we think we should keep that in mind, that aggregators in this instance can be helpful in the terms of making sure that all the all the resources are operated to their maximum efficiency. Did I get that right?
This is Arnie Olson again. I might just make a addendum to that. I think you got the general notion of it right. And it is true that in cases, you need to aggregate resource positions held by multiple entities in order to get the true portfolio value for the region. So you hit on really the way that happens in today's bilateral world, which these marketers play a pretty important function in terms of a middleman. And the more that you have regional institutions that can make that happen optimally and automatically, then the less you need some of these awkward mechanisms. So a wholesale energy market, for example, does that on an hourly basis, and you need less of this sort of the bilateral can serve a valuable hedging function, but you don't need it to make it work. You can make it work just with the hourly market. And then with respect to capacity, then an organization like RAP, if you have solar and someone else has hydro in their portfolio, RAP should be able to see both of those and give both of those a value that reflects that diversity.
We have time for one more public comment. And I can see the folks on Zoom again. If there's anybody else. Okay, that was a 10-second pause. Thank you very much. Let's talk about where we go from here, starting with some closing comments from our bench here.
First, or yeah, oh, sure, I'll go last. Glenn, you go ahead.
All right, I'll start. First, I think before we get done, we should ask Chair Dolio if she has any reactions to all of this. And I want to thank my local representative for showing up. And I challenge each of you to bring your own elected official next time. Okay. But anyway, in terms of the meeting, I once again am very impressed with the amount of information that goes into this resource adequacy question. It is a very complex activity to try to plan for the future this way, and it's gotten more complicated every year, it seems like. But it's really important that we keep an eye on it, and this meeting is evidence that we are doing our best to do that. I do recognize that in the first order, it's the utilities who need to do this. The government can support and back up and set policy. But in the first instance, we need to make sure that the utilities have their eyes on the ball. And this meeting is helpful for that purpose too, I think. So thanks everyone for coming, and in particular, the staff for arranging all this and cracking the whip on the presenters and everything to get everything together. So thank you.
And I also thank you for being here. I think sometimes it's better in person than on Zoom. So glad you're here in person, and appreciate all the panelists, whether you are here in person or online, and those who came to hear this important conversation, because there's many facets to it. I agree that it comes down to actually bringing resources to the grid, which is on the utilities, but I think it's also on us to make sure that we create the right environment for that to happen. But the RFPs and the going out and getting these resources and looking at in the IRPs, what is out there for the future to create an opportunity for things like geothermal, things like wave energy, things like, you know, small modular nuclear, to make sure that as we go farther out, we can actually meet this capacity need. But in the shorter term, we need the demand flexibility, because that's what we have access to right now to actually make this work, and the coordination between the gas and electric system, because both systems are tight. So there's a lot. There's not one thing we can do, but we need to focus on the short term, and we need to focus on the long term, and not take our eyes off the prize, because people's lives are at stake if we don't get this right.
So I too want to thank everybody for this. These are always so enlightening, if not also very sobering. And I would say that former Senator Sheldon sort of spoke the words that I would have liked. Not about your mom. That was nice background, you know, but just in terms of, you know, what we see coming, what we all have to see and expect. I think there are, you know, solutions. I'll really look forward to phase 2 of the E3 study, but it's we're all in this together. We at the Commission, Commerce, utilities, of course, and the policymakers also, to address these resource adequacy issues that are looming and, as I say, sobering. So I'm normally pretty positive, but I don't want to leave us with that negative note. So, so Brian, our chair, will lean up here.
Well, Commissioners Rendell and Dumit have already heard me use this analogy today, but it's fitting that it's the first day of fall today. We are at an equinox. We have as much daylight as we have darkness today. And I think that kind of sets up the conversation we had today. I heard a lot of challenges, a lot of concern, a lot of risk coming our way. But I also heard a lot of opportunities to think about systems differently, to think about how we can flexibly bring on new resources, how we can operate those resources. And I think that sort of creates that both concern and hope all at the same time. I also learned, thanks to Debbie Liu, that means the ELCC of solar is about to go down as we move into the fall. But more seriously, I think, as Nicholas noted here at the end, it's humans that are at the center of all of this. It's the humans that we serve, the people that we serve here as state regulators and the state legislature and everywhere, all of us. We're in public utilities. There's a reason we put the public in there. And so I think there can be kind of a tendency to hoard in these situations. There can be a tendency to share and cooperate in these situations. And these conversations are where we're at our best and where we're trying to figure out these problems together. We're trying to identify solutions together. So I'll end it on that positive note of, I think this continues this discussion of how we can solve these problems best for the customers that we serve.
Thank you very much. Next steps, and then we are adjourned. There will be, sure, yes. Representative Dolio, would you like to close us out? Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you, former Senator Sheldon, for putting this in statute. I think it has become ever more important to really look at adequacy and, you know, reliability, and then making sure that it's affordable for those of us who get to call Washington our home. So lucky. I think, you know, we are in a huge amount of uncertainty and change means opportunity. And I think it's really important. I think it's super exciting to be a part of figuring out how together we move forward in making sure that we have adequate, reliable, and affordable electricity and energy in the state, and do it in a way that is, meets our clean energy objectives, really moves forward on demand response, virtual power plants, really taking advantage of that, particularly right now as it becomes a little bit harder to build those utility scale wind and solar projects. I think really doubling down on energy efficiency demand response is super important right now. Of course, the data center conversation is super important as well. And I think there were some really good ideas expressed at the data center stakeholder meeting this morning, but also today I heard some really interesting things. And, I do believe that we'll be trying to address that and integrate them more into our grid, encourage and incent to be good grid citizens as they come online. And I really learned a ton today and look forward to working with each and every one of you as we move into session in January, and prior to that, being prepared to do it in a way that meets our clean energy goals and makes sure that we have the power that we need in this state. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and learn so much and have such a good, and I do believe this collaboration, it's not just collaboration within the state. We've got to collaborate with our neighbors, especially as it comes to the grid and the transmission. And I'm really looking forward to having more conversations about creating a regional transmission authority. We are alone in this world where the rest of the country already has an organized grid. And I think we really do need to move forward on that as well. So it's good to collaborate here, but I also hope that we're thinking beyond and looking at our neighbors to help us fill in some of the blanks when we have these peak events.
Thank you very much. For those who can't see the slide I've been sharing, we are required by statute to post a summary of this meeting, and we will do that, and we will post the recording within the next couple months. The slides are already on that website, but some folks changed small things about their slides. They were working till the last minute. So I will update those so that you all have most recent numbers soon. Our next resource adequacy meeting will be about winter readiness, and I believe it starts at 8:30 on the morning of November 4th. There's nothing official about that right now. We have to write a notice. The right people have to sign it. We have to create an agenda, but save that for your calendars, and we will post that to the website by mid-October. In sum, thank you everyone for showing up and for bringing your thoughts, your honest thoughts. Thank you to our awesome speakers for some great content. And thank you to Lisa in the back, especially for saving us and making this all happen. And we are adjourned.